Chapter 258. 10,000 Years. The Foundation of 10,000 Years. Suli sensed the depth of the foundation, and her first reaction was that she sensed it wrong. But no matter how she repeatedly confirmed, the foundation of 10,000 years was clearly there, without any change. Just as she had expected, the consciousness had lied to her. Suli's eyes flashed. According to the consciousness, the foundation of her two lives would not exceed 1,000 years at most, but now, it was a horrible 10,000 years. The reason for breaking the bracelet was false from beginning to end. There must be an ulterior purpose for the consciousness to make her break the bracelet. But it was useless for her to regret, and, the foundation of 10,000 years is enough to support me to achieve my goal. Suli murmured to herself in a low voice. Her eyes were clear. Looking at the light appearing in the sky, she turned around and sat down cross-legged, slowly closed her eyes and meditated. If this scene was seen by people who knew the inside story, they would be shocked and angry and stop Suli. East rising purple air was the best time to cultivate. But for Suli now, it was tantamount to a life-threatening talisman. Every time she practiced, her life would be shortened a little. Unfortunately, now only Suli knew this secret. As for the consciousness, in order to achieve its goal, it would not disclose it to others. After the morning sun was bright, Suli opened her eyes. An amazing light with strong surprise flashed from her eyes. She discovered that the speed of her cultivation had increased by a shocking amount. Just the practice of less than 2 hours made the total amount of her genuine energy increase visibly. If she kept practicing in isolation, wouldn't she soon reach the peak of the inborn 9th hurdle and start to break through the longevity realm? Moreover, because of the acceleration of cultivation, the speed of condensing the immortal house also improved. If there was no accident, she could break through the longevity realm in 2 months. It was too fast. It was so fast that it was frightening. Who had ever seen a 17-year-old practitioner of the longevity realm? No one had ever heard of it, let alone seen it. Even in the spiritual circle, it was impossible to see it. While Suli was puzzled, she brushed her wrist with her palm and felt it. Her heart immediately sank. Although the feeling was not very clear, she had just practiced for 2 hours, but her foundation had been reduced by at least 1 year. 1 year of life, in exchange for 2 hours of practice. Didn't it mean that she would lose 12 years of life for 1 day of practice in isolation? 10,000 years is too little. Suli looked indifferent, but her sigh floated out of the window and dissipated in the air. From this moment on, time had stopped for her. How long she could live depended on herself. After a while, Mammy Lee called Suli to have breakfast with Lord Rue. Suli hadn't had a meal with Lord Rue for a long time. Lord Rue was so happy that he grinned from ear to ear and kept putting snacks for Suli. In the middle of the meal, Suli suddenly put down her chopsticks and said, "Dad, accompany me to a place today." Okay. Dad will go with you." Prince Rue hurriedly nodded his head and did not ask where it was before agreeing. As a Wang Yi and a Wang Yi who did not have any real power in the court, he was usually very idle and did not have any other matters to deal with today. Of course, even if there were, Dongfang Rue would immediately refuse to accompany Suli. His precious daughter was usually too cold. Although she respected and loved him, they were not close. He had no good way to make up for it. Now, Suli suddenly proposed to travel with him. How could he refuse? "Thank you, Dad." Suli smiled slightly. Dongfang Rue smiled and nodded slightly. But he felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. Why did he feel that his daughter's smile was very reluctant? Wu Bin got the news and quickly prepared the carriage. Yuni sat in front of the carriage and was about to set off. But he was stunned and asked curiously, "Miss, where are we going?" "The Osmanthus forest." Su Li took a light breath and slowly said 3 words, as if these words weighed thousands of kilograms. Yun Yi was slightly shocked. He didn't ask any more questions and set off with the whip. Dongfang Rui sat beside Su Li and felt puzzled. The osmanthus forest was the burial place of Yun. Now it was not the day of memorial. Why did they go there? Half a day later, Su Li and the other 2 came to the top of the mountain. Dongfang Rui's doubts were finally solved because there was a new grave next to Su Yu's grave. Who is it? How dare they? How dare they set a grave next to Yun? Dongfang Rui was very angry. Before he finished his words, Yunyi gently pulled his sleeve and secretly reminded him, "Master, look at the words on the tombstone first. This grave was approved by Mississippi, otherwise, who dares to build a grave here without authorization? Was it approved by Li?" Dongfang Rui was stunned and immediately looked at the tombstone. When he saw the 2 lines on the tombstone, he was immediately shocked and couldn't help himself. At this time, Su Li had already walked to the tombstone. She knelt down without hesitation and kowtowed 3 times. The grave of Su Yu, the deceased wife. The grave of Su Yu, the deceased son. The grave was built by Xian Jingzhou alone. He used his hands to remove the hard soil and stones and then covered it with mud little by little. Only then did he know that Su Yu was pregnant for a short time. The news came that she died. No one knew how painful he was. Su Li knelt for a long time and said nothing. She heard from Chu Qingning that Xian Jingzhou shed 2 lines of blood and tears. After getting the news that Su Li was fine, he chose to go to Jianghu and left the place that made him sad and crazy. Russell, Dongfang Rui approached and finally stopped behind Su Li. He said in an uncertain and trembling tone, "Is she Yun's elder sister?" Su Li stopped throwing paper money into the brazier. She gently nodded and said calmly, "My aunt died a few days ago. She was pregnant." Dongfang Rui was shocked and speechless. He was inexplicably sad. If Su Yu died, only Li was left in the Su family. No. He frowned and soon thought of something strange. He didn't know that Su Yu died. But Su Li got the news first. Moreover, in the past 10 days, Su Li suddenly disappeared and Su Yu died. How could it be so coincidental? Li, tell me the truth. Does your aunt's death have anything to do with you? Su Li's movements stopped completely. There was a trace of obscure pain in her eyes. After a long time, she shook her head and continued to burn paper money for Su Yu without saying a word. Such a silent attitude made Dongfang Rui firmly believe that Su Yu's death must have something to do with his daughter. His heart became heavier. He knew that his daughter had always been mysterious. Every time Su Li disappeared, she didn't deliberately cover it up. He was not blind. How could he not notice it? If you don't want to say it, I won't force you. But you must protect yourself. You are the only descendant of the Su family. Even for your mother, don't put yourself in danger. Do you understand? Dongfang Rui's low voice came into her ears. Su Li's body was slightly stiff. She threw the last paper money and then turned around. She smiled sweetly, "I know, Dad. I won't let you down." Dongfang Rui knew that Su Li took his words seriously. He was a little relieved and said softly, "It's late. You can leave after worship. Come back on the Qingming festival. I want to be alone. You and Yunyi can go to the foot of the mountain to have a rest. I will come back soon." Dongfang Rui was used to Su Li's request. He nodded and turned to go down the mountain with Yunyi. After they went far away, the smile on Su Li's face gradually disappeared. At last, she became indifferent and cold. Her eyes were like lightning. She looked at the messy and lush grass and said coldly with no expression, "Do you want me to invite you out?" Soon after she said that, the grass that was blown by the wind moved and a person came out. Seeing the face of this person, Suli was shocked. Her eyes became colder and she said, "What are you doing here?" Ling Li's pale face was stunned. Seeing Suli in plain white clothes and the hatred and alienation in her eyes, he was more bitter. He said, "I just come to worship my aunt." Suli's indifferent face was full of sarcasm. She sneered, "Aunt? Why do you call her aunt? Cold Master Ling's skin is indeed much thicker than I imagined." Ling Li's heart ached and his eyes were full of bitterness. She had said the same thing not long ago, but the meaning behind it was completely different now. But, all of this was not what he wanted to happen. Ling Xian was also dead. Suli killed him personally. Even if he wanted to atone, he didn't know how to do it. After thinking about it, he could only worship Su Yu. But coincidentally, he met Suli. I already know the ins and outs of the matter. Suli, Ling Li was interrupted by Suli indifferently before he said, "The tomb of the Su family doesn't deserve your worship. Hierarch Ling, please go back." Ling Li's expression changed. He gritted his teeth and said, "Li, tell me what to do, get out." "Suli, get out." Suli's voice became hoarse. She looked directly at Ling Li. There was no love in her eyes, but only monstrous hatred and cold ruthlessness. "Ling Li, from now on, you and I have nothing to do with each other. You are not allowed to come to the tomb of the Su family. If I see you again, I will take action." After that, Suli turned around and stepped away without any hesitation. Ling Li's eyes were red. He shouted in a trembling voice, "Suli, you obviously like me these days. You said, 'Wait for me.' Are they all fake?" Suli's body slightly paused, and then disappeared from Ling Li's eyes at a faster speed. A ruthless voice came from afar. "The world is changeable. I don't blame anyone but the natural law. I am not a good match for you. Child Ling, you should find someone else. Everything in the past is just a passing cloud. I have forgotten it." "Forgotten it?" Ling Li smiled bitterly. It turned out that he was the only one who fell in love with her. It turned out that everything was just a play. But he took it seriously. At the foot of the mountain, Yuni saw Suli coming. His eyes were slightly red, but he still keenly noticed it. Miss cried. "Poor Madame Su Yu." Chapter 259. After the storm, Suli's life became calm, at least on the surface. Of course, for ordinary people in Yunjing City, the so-called storm was just the collapse of the old house and the city wall, nothing else. Suli announced that she would no longer give lectures. She was the only one in the affiliated school of the National Academy, and no other geniuses lived there. Such an announcement caused a lot of uproar. But Suli was the princess, and she was supported by Lord Rui. At least on the surface, no one dared to refute. The affiliated school of the National Academy became a private mansion, and Ling Li couldn't find an excuse to come in. Most of the time, Suli practiced in the mansion and rarely went out. In the eyes of outsiders, she was about to get married. The intelligence of the Linli building was sent by Fong Yuan every night. On the day when Suli woke up, his intention was exposed. Suli neither agreed nor refused. He had decided to let go of his mind and go further. But Suli's change during this time scared him away. Yes, scared away. Suli was cold on the outside but warm on the inside in the past. She had a sharp tongue but a soft heart. But now, Suli gave him the feeling that she was cold from inside to outside. Her indifferent eyes were no longer mixed with any personal feelings, as if nothing in the world could shake her again. She was ethereal and ruthless, like a lonely fairy in the cold moon palace. Feng Yuan's eyes were filled with endless loss. Although Su Li didn't say it clearly, her back had given him the answer. She would not marry anyone in this life. Who? In the night wind, Feng Yuan leaned against the door and gently breathed out a mouthful of turbid air. His eyes were bright and firm, and he smiled slightly. If you don't marry in your life, I won't marry anyone. I will stay with you. In this way, he was also happy and satisfied. At the same time, in the Ling mansion, Ling Li sat in the wheelchair calmly. Ling Imo silently pushed the wheelchair to the front of Chiu Meng's room. Then Chiu Meng came out and pushed Ling Li in. He stayed outside the door. Ling Imo looked up at the sky. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse. It seemed that tomorrow would be a good day. When he came back, everything was over. Ling Imo sighed in his heart. The death of Ling Xian made him sigh, but it was just a sigh. Although she was also the young master's right-hand man and had grown up with the young master, their relationship was not close. Because he instinctively hated women who were too scheming. Although he didn't understand women, he knew that Ling Xian was not broad-minded. Over the years, Ling Xian had secretly eradicated many dissidents in the cult. Although that kind of behavior was less in recent years, it couldn't change his perception. A few days ago, when he arrived at the destination, he knew that he was deceived by Ling Xian with false information. He immediately returned. Unfortunately, although Miss Su survived, she still made a big mistake. Thinking of this, Ling Imo couldn't help but sigh. If Ling Xian was still alive, maybe the master could exchange her for forgiveness. But now Ling Xian was buried, and the situation was complicated. As long as the master was the hierarch of the Yinmo cult, it would be impossible for him to marry Miss Su. But for the sake of the Ling family, the young master couldn't give up the identity of the Yinmo cult. This was a dead knot. No one could undo it. Inside the house. Li, tell me the truth. What happened between you and Su Li? Did they quarrel? Quarrel? Hearing his mother's words, Ling Li was full of depression, but he pretended to be indifferent. He shook his head and smiled. It's okay, mother. I can deal with it myself. Seeing this, Chiu Meng frowned more tightly. No matter what, Ling Li was her son. She watched him grow up. How could she not see that Ling Li was forcing himself to smile? In the past few months, she saw her son go out happily every day. She thought that the marriage was going to be finished soon. But recently, Su Li suddenly announced that she would stop teaching and no one was allowed to enter the mansion. In fact, she was resisting Ling Li. Something must have happened. But her son didn't say it. She couldn't ask Su Li, could she? Immediately, Chiu Meng could only say helplessly, son, since Su Li appeared, you have changed your ways recently. You don't go to those brothels. I am very pleased, but I don't want to see you hurt because of love. If Su Li really doesn't want to marry into the Ling family, you'd better forget her as soon as possible. Ling Li trembled slightly, and his eyes flashed with struggle. Forget her, was it possible? At this moment, Ling Imo reported outside the door. Madam, Master Qinglan is here. Chiu Meng frowned and murmured, it's so late. Why does he come here? After a while, Ling Qinglan opened the door and saw Ling Li, who looked haggard. He couldn't help but smile and said, Aunt, I heard that my cousin is in a bad mood. I finished the case and came to see him. Chiu Meng's eyes brightened. She walked to Ling Qinglan and whispered, you come at the right time. I talked to your brother, but he refused to talk. You two are similar in age. Maybe it's more useful for you to talk to him. Take him back to the east courtyard. Auntie, Qinglan understands. Ling Qinglan nodded slightly and pushed Ling Li's wheelchair back to the east courtyard. Ling Mo closed the door and guarded at the door. Ling Qinglan shook his head helplessly and sighed. I have already known it from Ling Mo. To put it bluntly, I am not used to it when there is no one around you. Ling Li's expression was slightly cold, but his face was still calm. He said in a low voice, It's so late. What are you doing here? Ling Qinglan was stunned. Ling Li's reaction was much quieter than he imagined. A few months ago, Ling Li's performance clearly showed that he liked Su Li very much. Now such a thing happened. He should not let it go so easily. Looking at Ling Li's quiet eyes, Ling Qinglan's heart sank slightly. Maybe it was not quiet. There is one thing I have to tell you. Su Qingtan is out of practice. Ling Qinglan's sudden words really shocked Ling Li. Even Ling Mo couldn't help but turn his head to look. After practicing in practice for more than half a year, Su Qingtan has broken through the inborn realm and mastered Qiyu Xiangong. Now he is waiting outside the east courtyard. Hearing Ling Qinglan's words, Ling Li frowned and said, How much does Su Qingtan know about Su Li? Ling Qinglan smiled and said, He just came out of practice for less than 2 hours and was directly brought here by me. How much do you think he knows? Ling Li's expression changed and his eyes flickered. But only after a moment, the light in his eyes dimmed. Su Li was not an ordinary woman. She was as intelligent as a demon. In some aspects, she was even more enchanting than him. If he used Su Qingtan to restore the relationship, it would only make Su Li farther away from him. Thinking of this, Ling Li sighed slightly and said with a little tiredness, Qiyu Xiangong is the unique martial art of the Yinma cult. From the day you imparted it to him, it was destined that Su Qingtan couldn't leave the Yinma cult. Otherwise, even I can't protect him. Let him come in first. Ling Qinglan was slightly surprised and immediately took a deep look at Ling Li, who closed his eyes to rest. Did he still want to reconcile with Su Li in such a situation? Outside the east courtyard, Su Qingtan's pale face showed some confusion and curiosity. This was the famous Ling general's mansion. Why did Ling Qinglan bring him here? I have really mastered Qiyu Xiangong. My cultivation has reached the inborn realm. No matter who I meet, I have the strength to be confident. Su Qingtan was full of confidence. More than half a year ago, he was just an ordinary man who was not even a senior in Jianghu. Now he directly skipped the acquired 9th hurdle and reached the inborn realm. Since then, he had become extraordinary. He was no longer a soft persimmon that could be bullied by others. In the future, he could also use his own strength to protect his second sister and make her safe and happy all her life. Qingtan, come in. Ling Qinglan's voice came. Su Qingtan was slightly shocked and came to his sense. He did not hesitate to walk into the east courtyard. Compared with half a year ago, his attitude towards Ling Qinglan had changed dramatically. It could be said that at the beginning, Su Qingtan was almost forced to join the Yinma cult by Ling Qinglan. He always had some resentment in his heart. Later, during the time of practicing in seclusion, he got a lot of secret information from the middle-aged guard beside Ling Qinglan. It turned out that his cultivation was exchanged with Ling Qinglan's life. If Ling Qinglan didn't have other opportunities and escaped from death, he would have died long ago. Ling Qinglan's original purpose was to let Su Qingtan take over his position in the Yinma cult. Su Qingtan trusted Ling Qinglan and sacrificed himself. Although Ling Qinglan had selfish motives, it was really a great favor for him. How could he still resent Ling Qinglan? He only had gratitude and admiration in his heart. Not everyone had the courage to sacrifice his own life for others. At least, he couldn't do it. Ling Qinglan, who could do this, naturally won his respect. Creak, Su Qingtan lowered his head and followed him in. His heart was beating like a drum. The atmosphere in the room was very depressing. Well, Su Qingtan, this is the hierarch of our cult. Come and greet him first. Ling Qinglan said lightly. Su Qingtan was refreshed. It was a great honor for him to meet the legendary, Child Li, today. He raised his head and saw the expressionless young man sitting in the wheelchair. His respectful expression immediately turned into astonishment. He didn't come to his sense for a long time. He subconsciously turned his head to look at Ling Qinglan. The latter smiled gently and said, "There is no doubt. Child Li is the third master of the Ling family, Ling Li." Su Qingtan's eyes widened when he heard the words. He was shocked in his heart. The famous #1 waste in Yunjing City should be the hierarch of the Yinma cult who was feared in the martial arts circle. How could it be possible? Su Qingtan, greet you, hierarch. Su Qingtan was dizzy and finished the salute in confusion. If it was someone else, Ling Li would definitely scold him. But facing Su Qingtan, Ling Li just nodded slightly and let him go. Ling Mo, tell him about Su Li in the past 6 months. When Su Qingtan heard the name, Su Li, he was shocked. The second sister even got the attention of Child Li. What happened in the past 6 months? After 5 minutes, he heard Ling Mo's words. He opened his mouth slightly and was completely stunned. Chapter 260. An hour later, Su Qingtan followed Ling Qinglan and left the Ling mansion in a daze. What he heard and saw tonight was really a little too shocking. "Lord, we've arrived at the Su mansion." The coachman's humble voice came into his ears, which brought Su Qingtan back to reality from his distant contemplation. He jumped off the carriage and let the coachman leave. Looking at the slightly old plaque of Su Mansion hanging on the small mansion, he sighed with emotion. The Su family had changed a lot in half a year. Knock, knock. Soon after the knock sounded, the door was pushed open, and the sleepy concierge stuck his head out of the door. When he saw Su Qingtan in black, he was stunned at first, and then he widened his eyes and said with joy, "First Master. You're back." Su Qingtan nodded with a smile. Anyway, his mother and brother were here. It was his home. The concierge quickly opened the door to let Su Qingtan in, and then he shouted excitedly, "Master, Madam. First Master is back. First Master is back." Really? Many servants were woken up and came out one after another. Not long after, there was a burst of dense footsteps in the backyard. Then Su Huanli, Li Yulian and Su Qinghao hurried to the front hall. When they saw Su Qingtan standing straight like a pine tree in the front hall, they were all surprised. "Tan! Eldest brother." Li Yulian stepped forward and grabbed Su Qingtan's hand. She choked with tears in her eyes and said, "What on earth can delay you for half a year? I'm really worried about you." Mother. Seeing his mother, Su Qingtan's cold expression became gentle, and he comforted her softly. The woman had never treated him badly since he was a child. No matter whether he was excellent or not, and no matter whether his decision was right or not, she always stood on his side without hesitation. Although his mother didn't like the second sister very much before, she didn't bully her. It had nothing to do with his mother that Su Li left the Su family. Eldest brother. Su Qinghao's eyes sparkled with excitement. In his mind, the eldest brother was his real idol. In just 2 years, the eldest brother stood out from the poor children and became the officer of the Supreme Judiciary. Ordinary people couldn't do that. You've grown taller. Su Qingtan smiled happily and touched Su Qinghao's head. Su Qinghao shook his head awkwardly and complained, "Eldest brother, I have grown up." Su Qingtan immediately burst into laughter. This silly boy was still the same as before. It's good that you're back. The family has been in a mess these days. Su Huanli showed a bitter face. When he was about to say something, he saw that Su Qingtan's gentle expression suddenly became extremely cold. "I have learned the details from the Supreme Judiciary." "Dad, what do you want to say?" Su Huanli's face changed slightly, and then his old face turned red because of anger. His son was kind to his mother and brother, but his son gave him a hard time as soon as he came back. "You unfilial son. Do you know who you're talking to? What kind of attitude is this?" Su Huanli pulled a long face and cursed. Su Qingtan's face became colder. When he was about to take action, another silver-haired old woman came into the room. She was Ma'am Su Chui, the mother of Su Huanli, who was the most senior in the Su family. "Ma'am." Su Chui ran fast with a crutch. When she came, she pulled Su Qingtan's sleeve tightly and talked like a machine gun. "Oh, my good grandson, you're finally back. If you don't come back, I don't know how my Su family will be bullied by area." As soon as the words came out, Su Qingtan slightly narrowed his eyes and said nothing. But Su Qinghao couldn't help but stand up and refute with full confidence. "Grandma, you're wrong. Second sister didn't bully us. It's the first aunt who bullied us too much and asked for it." "Shut up, ma'am." Su Chui's face became gloomy. She scolded Su Qingtan so fiercely that his face turned pale. If he didn't have filial piety in his heart, he would go up and beat the old woman. Not because of anything else, but because she was a complete and utter scum. He glanced at Su Qingtan, who was expressionless. He made up his mind and no longer cared about his mother's usual warning. He snorted and said, "You are actually my grandma. It really makes me feel ashamed." "Ma'am." Su Chui was so angry that her eyes turned round. She grabbed Su Qingtan, who was indifferent, with one hand and pointed at Su Qinghao with the other. She scolded, "Bastard! I am your grandma. How dare you talk to me in this tone? How did your mother teach you?" She didn't see Su Qingtan's increasingly dangerous eyes. She continued to pretend to be pitiful. "Eldest grandson, I'm afraid you don't know what happened these days. Your first mother and third sister were harmed by the vicious area. I don't know what kind of suffering my poor little Yen is suffering in the frontier now. Zipei is even reduced to a slave. All of this is done by Area, whom you try to protect. Such a vicious girl, you have been protecting her before. Do you know that she dared to rob Zipei's status of the princess? She is really cunning and vicious. If you are still stubborn, maybe she will use you in the future." After the evil girl became the princess, she didn't come back even once. She didn't bring any benefits to the Su family. "I am so angry. Ma'am." Su Chui was more and more angry. She beat her chest and persuaded him earnestly. She dared to say that because of her seniority. To put it bluntly, she was taking advantage of her seniority. She was the most senior in the whole Su family. Even if she said it bluntly, no one would disobey her. At least, she thought so. But when she finished her long persuasion, the whole room fell into a terrible silence. Su Qingtan didn't respond. This made Ma'am Su Chui panicked and kept cheering herself up. No way. She was Su Qingtan's grandma. Haha. After a long silence, Su Qingtan suddenly smiled and said to Ma'am Su Chui, "Grandma, have you finished?" "Ma'am." Su Chui looked happy. When she was about to add something, the smile on Su Qingtan's face disappeared instantly and became cold. Ma'am. Su Chui, I respect you as an elder. But, who gave you the courage to lie? Do you think that everyone in the world is a fool except you? Then ma'am. Su Chui's face changed dramatically. She was so angry that she trembled and pointed at Su Qingtan, unfilial son, how dare you disobey your grandma? Su Qingtan's eyes were cold. He shook off ma'am. Su Chui's hand suddenly staggered and almost fell down. Because you are my grandma, otherwise, do you think that you can still stand and talk to me? As Su Qingtan spoke, a trembling momentum originated from the inborn realm instantly pressed down. Ma'am. Su Chui couldn't stand the pressure. She fell to the ground instantly. Her wrinkled face was full of fear. Su Qingtan dared to hurt her. This was the Dahan country, which took filial piety as the most important thing. There is filial piety in the book. We should respect the elders, but it doesn't mean blind filial piety. Do you think that you can play with the whole family in the palm of your hand because you are my grandma? Su Qingtan looked indifferent and said, I didn't care about all kinds of dirty things in the Daisu town because the second sister didn't want to care about it. Now Zhu Yan and Su Zipei robbed the second sister's opportunity, but you turned black and white upside down. Do you want me to help you to hurt the second sister? Ma'am. Su Chui fell to the ground. Her old body trembled and she couldn't speak. Su Qingtan became completely different after he came back for more than half a year. The filial piety in his heart was no longer an iron restraint. In the past, no matter how angry he was, he couldn't directly hurt ma'am. But now he did it without hesitation. Qiyu Xiangong. Su Qingtan was expressionless, but he sighed in his heart. After all, it was an evil martial art. It had a little influence on his temperament, but he didn't dislike it. If he really cared about it, he would be more grateful to Ling Qinglan for giving him this opportunity to transform. Otherwise, he would continue to be bound by the indoctrination of the sages of the Dahan country. Everyone, listen up. Ma'am. Su Chui will live in the back 3 courtyards. She can't go out of the courtyard. Except for the daily necessities, no one can obey her orders. If anyone disobeys her orders, he will be expelled from the Su family directly. As soon as Su Qingtan's order came out, Su Huanli's face changed greatly. Even Li Yuelian's expression was a little strange. Only Su Qinghao was happy and clenched his fist hard. He didn't like the old witch for a long time. Now she finally got the punishment she deserved from the eldest brother. Since Su Qingtan became the officer of the Supreme Judiciary, the sovereignty of the Su family fell in his hands. At this moment, when he gave an order, a bold servant immediately took ma'am. Su Chui out. Staying in the backyard and waiting for death was the end of ma'am. Su Chui. After doing this, Su Qingtan glanced at the servants and maids coldly. He snorted and said, if I hear any more rumors about the second sister, you will all be expelled from the Su family. Do you understand? Yes. The servants answered in unison and then retreated with awe. There were only Su Huanli, Li Yuelian and Su Qinghao in the room. Su Qingtan looked at Su Huanli. Although his tone was respectful as a son, it also contained a warning, Father, the Su family doesn't need to worry about food and clothing. It all depends on the byway building left by the second sister. You should be satisfied. Contented people can always be happy. You have lived for so many years. Don't you know that? Su Huanli's pupils shrank slightly. He snorted angrily and left. To deal with Su Li. He was not as bold and crazy as ma'am. Su Chui and Zhu Yan. How could he offend Su Li, who was already a princess? He never thought about that kind of thing. It was enough for him to protect the byway building and make money. Li Yuelian sighed softly and walked to Su Qingtan. There was a trace of appreciation in her eyes. She said, "You deserve to be my son. You can distinguish right from wrong. I understand some things, but in order to protect myself, I have to do this. Now you become the person in charge of the Sioux family. Naturally, you don't need to be so careful. Today, you showed your courage. I am very pleased." Su Qingtan was a little embarrassed by the praise. He knew that his mother was very smart, so he didn't worry that his mother would be prejudiced against him. "Well, it's late. You should take a bath and have a rest." Li Yuelian was very tired after a busy day. Soon she went to have a rest. Only Su Qinghao and Su Qingtan talked by candlelight. Eldest brother, the second sister hasn't changed after she became a princess. Except that she is a little busy at ordinary times, there is no obstacle for me to take the fourth sister to play there. It's not like what Grandma said. Su Qinghao wanted to clarify for Su Li, so he said in detail what happened in the past 6 months. Chapter 261. The frost in the early morning of spring was very thick. Both sides of the street were covered with white, and it would not fade until the sun rose. In the room where Su Li lived in the affiliated school of the National Academy, the charcoal crackled, and wisps of heat rose from the holes of the heater, making the room as warm as spring. Su Li wore a thin coat and reclined on the soft couch by the window. A pair of clear eyes stared at the old booklet in her hand. She was extremely fascinated. When the first ray of morning light came in through the window, Su Li squinted her beautiful eyes and put down the booklet in her hand. "I didn't expect that after breaking the ring, my understanding has been improved so much. In just 2 days, I have comprehended the 4th hurdle of AO sword skills, and I am not far from the 5th hurdle." She couldn't think of the disadvantages of breaking the ring, and the consciousness in Mei Ruhan's mind would not tell her. So, it was useless to think about how to use the foundation after breaking the ring. She had made some discoveries after studying these days. The speed of practice had become faster. And it was not just a little bit faster. If she wanted, she could break through to the longevity realm in another month. Her current state was more suitable to say, conversion, than to practice. Converting the foundation into cultivation was certainly faster than absorbing the spiritual power from the outside world. Of course, the more and faster she practiced, the closer she would be to death. If she couldn't grasp this point well, it would be useless to have a higher cultivation. The second point was the improvement of the understanding. Su Li's eyes flickered slightly. She had obtained AO sword skills from Jin Qing AO for a long time, but she always lingered in the 4th hurdle and couldn't enter the 5th hurdle. Although she had some achievements in swordsmanship in the previous life, her talent was still not good enough to comprehend such a wonderful book as AO sword skills. But these defects disappeared after the ring was broken. It seemed that her innate understanding was so enchanting and beyond the cognition. "Fortunately, I comprehend AO sword skills based on my understanding and didn't consume the foundation. Otherwise, no matter how much foundation I have, I can't stand the consumption." Su Li sighed softly. If a warrior only had the strength of genuine energy without the means to fight against the enemy, he was simply a waste. A Xiantian second-stage martial artist who only knew how to practice, if he were to encounter a Xiantian first-stage martial artist who had gone through hundreds of battles, then he might not even be able to last one move. Cultivation was one aspect, and martial techniques were another. Only by possessing both could one become an expert of the same level. My cultivation is now stuck at the peak of the inborn realm. I don't know how much foundation will be consumed to break through to the longevity realm. Now it's not the right time, and I don't have to rush to break through. It's better to spend all my time on martial arts. With my terrifying comprehension, I may be able to compete with the longevity realm. While Su Li was thinking, Mammy Li's joyful voice came from outside the door. "Young miss, the young master is here. Young master. Su Li was stunned, and then the indifference on her face became gentle. Is it my eldest brother? That's right. Young Master Qing Tan just came back last night and came this morning. Mammy Li's voice came again. A smile appeared on Su Li's face. Let eldest brother wait for a while. I will change my clothes now. Sigh. Mammy Li responded and quickly went to reply. Soon after, Su Li changed her clothes and came to the front room. Then she saw Mammy Li and Su Qingtan chatting casually. Mammy, if you didn't take the risk to find me 2 years ago, I wouldn't know that my second sister had suffered so much. Now the bitterness is over and the happiness is coming. What the young master said is right. Su Qingtan sighed with emotion. Su Li's origin did not affect his love for Su Li, which began to sprout a long time ago. Now that he knew that Su Li was not related to him by blood, he didn't know what his feelings for Su Li were. Eldest brother. A clear and melodious voice suddenly came, which was as sweet as clear spring water. Su Qingtan's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head and saw Su Li in plain white clothes walking towards him. Her temperament was more ethereal than before, and her skirt was fluttering like a fairy descending to the world. Su Qingtan was stunned for a while. He hadn't seen his second sister for more than half a year. Although her beautiful face was covered by the secret skill of nothing unusual, it was still intoxicating. Eldest brother, what are you looking at? The voice was getting closer. Su Qingtan came to his sense and smiled bitterly. Second sister, with your appearance now, I'm afraid that many people will come to propose marriage to you. Su Li squinted her eyes and chuckled. Eldest brother, what are you talking about? No one comes and no one dares to come. Hearing this, Su Qingtan was stunned again. In his impression, his second sister would never say such overbearing words. She became confident and calm. She was no longer a weak girl who had to ask for his opinion. If he compared Su Li to a frightened deer in the past, now she became an elegant white swan, noble and cool. Thinking of Su Li's current identity, Su Qingtan's expression was slightly stiff. He forced a smile and said, Second sister, you seem to have changed a lot in the past half a year. People always change. Su Li pretended to sigh and immediately hugged Su Qingtan's arm. She said seriously, but no matter how I change, you are my eldest brother. Su Qingtan was slightly stunned. He was stunned for a moment, but a silly smile appeared on his face. He nodded heavily. I will always be your eldest brother. At the same time, the strangeness in Su Qingtan's heart faded away. At the same time, he felt a little ashamed. For a moment, he thought that Su Li would alienate him because of her identity. Sure enough, he thought too much. No matter how his second sister's temperament changed, as long as she didn't change in front of him, it was enough. After thinking it through, Su Qingtan opened his mind and played with Su Li for a day. He didn't leave until the evening. Ling Qinglan only gave him 1 day to rest, and he spent all his time on Su Li. Eldest brother, be careful on the way. Su Qingtan's carriage drove away from the affiliated school of the National Academy. Su Li's gentle and cordial expression faded away. She returned to the room. Fang Yuan, who was hiding behind the screen, appeared in a flash. He frowned and said, Su Qingtan got involved in the Yinmo cult. Shall we get him out? With the Hongyan house as an intelligence agent, the Linli building knew the situation in Yunjing City like the palm of its hand. Although everything was calm now, the Yinmo cult would eventually attack the royal family. If Su Qingtan got involved, he would definitely be in danger. Su Li's eyes were slightly gloomy. All kinds of thoughts flashed through her eyes. Then she shook her head and said, No. Qiyu Xiangong is the secret of the Yinmo cult. Eldest brother has practiced it, so he is the core figure of the Yinmo cult. Even if Ling Li is willing to let him go, the elders of the Yinmo cult will not agree. It turns out that there is such a secret. Fang Yuan's heart sank and he stopped talking. Compared with Su Li, his vision was still too narrow. Su Li worried about many things at this time, but Su Qingtan was not. The current situation was stable. With the help of Ling Qinglan, Su Qingtan was now an inborn senior. His temperament and life-saving ability had been greatly improved. It was not so easy for him to be killed. What she cared about most at the moment was the Wanjian sect. Since the auction house, the people of the Wanjian sect had disappeared. When Ting Shan came back from the Qinghe province, it was unreasonable that there was no movement for such a long time. There were only two possibilities in this situation. The first possibility was that the people of the Wanjian sect had left and stopped chasing Wen Tingshan. But for the position of the head of the Wanjian sect, they would not easily give up. Then there was only the second possibility. They were delayed by something. Maybe someone was facing a breakthrough, or maybe they were facing greater interests. There are few forces in Yunjing City who can help to cover their tracks so well. Su Li's eyes flashed. She said, "Help me to make an appointment with Ling Li as Mr. Li. The time is tomorrow. See him." Fang Yuan was slightly shocked and his face became pale. He couldn't help but ask, "Why do you want to see him?" Su Li turned around. Her clear eyes seemed to be able to see through people's hearts, which made Fang Yuan inexplicably frightened. Fang Yuan wanted to explain, but he was interrupted by Su Li's cold voice. "The Wanjian sect is a great threat. If we can't find him, the Linli building will not be peaceful. The Yinmo cult and the Wanjian sect used to have a bad relationship in the spiritual circle. It is a win-win situation to cooperate with the Yinmo cult." Speaking of this, Su Li's eyes were complicated, and her expression was still cold. She said, "Because of my affairs, the Linli building should also respond. This is the best time for me to get rid of the relationship with Mr. Li." Fang Yuan frowned when he heard it, and then he stretched his eyebrows. There was an obscure surprise on his cold face. Although he still didn't know what Su Li wanted to do after hearing these words, it was the first time that Su Li explained the purpose of the action to him, so he was naturally happy. Soon after, Fang Yuan left in the night. Su Li looked at the dim night sky and stood in the cold wind for a moment. Then she returned to the room and continued to study the AO sword skills. Soon, the news of the Linli building came to the Ling mansion. Li's affairs happened 7 days ago, and the Linli building responded. Did Mr. Li make an appointment? Ling Li received the news and frowned deeply. This matter was full of strangeness. It was too strange. If Mr. Li intended to stand up for Su Li, he should not be so slow. But if he didn't have a deep relationship with Su Li, he should not get involved in this kind of thing, so as to avoid trouble. Ling Qinglan, who came to deliver the news, also looked dignified. He said in a deep voice, "Before, we had always been in a cooperative relationship with the Linli building. We even established a preliminary friendship with the Linli building because of the full moon and heartstrings incident. Now we rely on the Linli building for a lot of elixirs and poisons. If Mr. Li cuts off the supply, our actions are bound to be affected." Ling Li closed his eyes and rubbed his eyebrows. Then he opened his eyes again, and his eyes were shining. "Tomorrow, I will be well prepared. No matter what Mr. Li does, I will take it." Chapter 262. On the lake, on the ship. It was still the place where they met last time. The difference was that Fang Yuan, who disguised himself, stood beside Su Li. At this moment, he was standing outside the ship house, side by side with Ling Yimo. In the ship house, Ling Li looked at the young man in cyan who was natural on the side of the chessboard. He was slightly shocked and then chuckled. He broke the silence first. "Mr. Li, you invited me here. You don't just want to play chess, do you?" Su Li's long and narrow eyes flashed a hint of obscure complexity. She picked up a chess piece with her fingertips and said absent-mindedly, "Of course not. Hierarch Ling, you are busy. How dare I disturb you?" Ling Li frowned slightly and tapped on the side of the chessboard with his fingers. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Mr. Li, just say it. I haven't seen you for a long time. Hierarch Ling, you seem to be more irritable." Su Li judged slowly, and her smile gradually became cold. "Hierarch Ling, I think you can guess the purpose of my coming here today. Please give me an explanation for the attack on me by the higher-ups of your cult a few days ago." Ling Li breathed slightly and his expression changed. Sure enough, he came to seek justice for her. Su Li was his woman, but now it was a strange man's turn to seek justice for her. How ironic was it? He looked slightly pale and said coldly, "Su Li once said that you don't have a deep relationship with her. I will deal with it myself. It seems that it is not your turn to intervene as an outsider, right? Hierarch Ling, you are wrong." Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly and pinched her fingertips between her knees. She pretended to be relaxed and said, "Hierarch Ling, you don't know. If you killed Su Li, although I have some cooperation with her, I won't stand up for her. But Su Yu, who you killed, is a member of the Lin Li building." Hearing this, Ling Li's expression changed instantly. Su Yu, Su Li's aunt, turned out to be a member of the Lin Li building. Su Yu is at the peak of the inborn realm. She is a great fighting force of the Lin Li building. Not only that, her husband is also a member of me, and he is a senior in the inborn 8th hurdle. After Su Yu's death, her husband also disappeared. You made the Lin Li building lose 2 fighters of the inborn realm. How should we settle this account? Su Li's words shocked Ling Li and made him completely speechless. In this way, after Li's aunt died, her uncle also left her. Would she be wronged? Ling Li gently spat out a mouthful of turbid air. He nodded and lowered his eyes. A touch of pain emerged. If he had noticed Ling Xian's abnormality earlier, all this would not have happened. It was the result of his negligence. No matter how Su Li blamed and hated him, it was not an exaggeration. At the moment when he raised his head, Ling Li's expression had returned to normal. He said slowly, "Our Inma cult admits it. What compensation do you want?" A trace of surprise flashed between Su Li's eyebrows. Ling Li had always been hostile to her identity. There would be some twists and turns today. She didn't expect that he would be so easy to talk to. Sect Master is truly a straightforward person. This matter is related to the face of the Lin Li building. If we don't make some compensation, we will be regarded as weak. My request is not much, only 2. First, I originally wanted sect leader to hand over the murderer, but after my investigation, I found that there was no need to hand over the murderer. Compensate the Lin Li building with 100 Wudao stones. As soon as the words came out, the 3rd elder standing behind Ling Li immediately frowned. 100 Wudao stones were too much. The value of the full moon and heartstrings auctioned in Yunjing City was no more than 10 Wudao stones. Mr. Li asked for 100 Wudao stones. It was an exorbitant demand. Sure enough, Ling Li couldn't help but frown when he heard this. 100 Wudao stones are too much. Even if our Inma cult takes out so many at once, the foundation will be shaken. I can only give you 50 at most. This is the limit that I can decide. Su Li's eyes flashed and she gently nodded. I don't know the wealth of your spiritual circle. So, 50 is okay. Seeing that Suli agreed, Lingli secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but he had doubts in his heart. Your spiritual circle. Was Mr. Li not a person of the spiritual circle? Were there other cultivation circles besides the spiritual circle? The details of this person were a mystery, and it had been impossible to find out. But what he said might be a deliberate decoy, so he couldn't be easily believed. Thinking of this, Lingli got rid of distracting thoughts and continued to say, "What's the second request?" Suli raised the corner of her mouth and smiled mysteriously. "The second request is not so much a request, but I want to cooperate with you again." Cooperation? Lingli was puzzled. Now the Yinma cult and the Linli building had no common interests. What else could they cooperate with? I remember that your Yinma cult has always been at odds with the Wanjian sect in the spiritual circle, right? Suli said bluntly with her eyes shining. The relationship between the Yinma cult and the Wanjian sect was told by Lingli himself, and then confirmed by Wen Tingshan. Now it became a tool in her hands to decoy. Lingli's body shook slightly, and he said meaningfully, "Mr. Li is really resourceful. You even know the news of the spiritual circle clearly." Suli chuckled and said indifferently, "It was not a secret in the spiritual circle decades ago. It is not difficult for me to know it. And I also know that a group of people of the Wanjian sect has been staying in Yunjing City in recent months. But they are good at hiding, so they haven't left any traces. It seems that the cooperation you are going to propose has something to do with the Wanjian sect." Lingli's tone was full of doubts, but he was more sure. Suli nodded and said, "To be honest, the Linli building and the Wanjian sect also have some grievances. I will not be at peace if I don't find out those rats. Why don't you and I cooperate to investigate and find them out as soon as possible? Such cooperation is what the Yinma cult is looking forward to." "But..." Lingli's eyes flickered. "What do you want to do after finding out the people of the Wanjian sect?" Suli didn't hesitate and replied with a smile, "It's good if we can catch them alive. But if we can't catch them, we can only kill them." Lingli took a deep look at Suli, who was smiling. After thinking for a moment, he nodded and said, "Such cooperation is what the Yinma cult is looking forward to. Later, I will send Xinghu to contact the Linli building and share intelligence." "That's good. Since it's settled, I won't stay here any longer. Goodbye." Suli stood up and smiled with her hands folded. Then she turned around and left without any hesitation. Lingli frowned when he saw Suli leave. He thought that Mr. Li came to denounce him, but when they met, the so-called apology was just a formality. He was afraid that even if he reduced the number of Wudao stones to 10, Mr. Li would also agree. The real purpose was for the Wanjian sect. "Hierarch, since Mr. Li is also hostile to the Wanjian sect, maybe we can cooperate with him to kill our way to the spiritual circle." The third elder's voice suddenly sounded, and his eyes were full of light. "Mr. Li is extremely not simple. Even I feel a faint sense of danger when facing him. If there is no accident, his cultivation must reach the level of the longevity realm. The longevity realm can only be broken through in the spiritual circle, and he is also inextricably linked with the spiritual circle." Lingli thought quickly, but then he shook his head and said slowly, "It's hard to say everything based on this person's words. The Wanjian sect has been in chaos in recent years. Now a small group of people inexplicably appeared in Yunjing City, and the Linli building hurried to deal with them. It's hard to say the relationship between them and the Wanjian sect." The third elder's face changed slightly. "You mean..." Lingli waved his hand to stop the third elder from continuing, "It's just my guess. We have to find the people of the Wanjian sect to decide the specific situation. Hierarch is wise." The third elder bowed his head and complimented. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Although his cultivation was at the peak, he was still far behind the hierarch in terms of quick thinking. With Ling Qinglan's help, the Yinma cult couldn't restore its prosperity in the past. Old ancestor has found the right successor, the third elder thought of Su Li again. Now he knew that Su Li, who was almost killed by Ling Xian that day, was the masked woman in the Tang mansion. At that time, he thought that the woman was just an ordinary person. Later, when they met in the alley, he knew that Su Li was good at hiding. Her cultivation was not inferior to that of the hierarch. She was decisive in killing and quick in thinking. If such an amazing woman married the hierarch, it would be a good story. Unfortunately, the third elder shook his head and sighed. It was too late to say anything now. The Yinma cult and the Linli building, the two secret forces in Yunjing City, joined hands. Yunjing City seemed to be peaceful, but in fact, it was turbulent. Spies of the two forces were everywhere. They searched for the whereabouts of the people of the Wangjian sect inch by inch. Even Su Qingtan also participated in it. He was responsible for the exploration of a small area. Ling Qinglan was very busy, not only because of the Yinma cult, but also because of the trifles of the Supreme Judiciary. He was busy until late at night every day. On the one hand, he couldn't stand Mrs. Gu's repeated persuasion. On the other hand, for the sake of the Yinma cult, he now lived in the Ling mansion and didn't care about the third prince deliberately. After the auction house, the first prince and the third prince almost lost favor at the same time. They were put under house arrest by Dongfang Shao and couldn't go out. Now the fifth prince was the most prestigious one in the royal family. That night, Ling Qinglan finished his business and returned to the Ling mansion alone. The night was as cold as water. The cold street under the moonlight looked bright. Ling Qinglan's shadow was long. He walked around the last corner and saw the gate of the Ling mansion. The lanterns on both sides of the gate had not been extinguished yet. Ling Qinglan felt warm and smiled. He knew that Aunt Chiu Meng specially left the lanterns for him. At this moment, crack. Chapter 263. In the dim night, a beautiful woman in plain white clothes came into Ling Qinglan's eyes. She looked a little nervous and her eyes were extremely bright. She was looking at him with a very strange look. Ling Qinglan raised his eyebrows and walked to her. He said softly, "It's late at night. It's not peaceful in Yunjing City. What are you doing here alone?" Then, the beautiful woman didn't answer. She just looked at him blankly. It seemed that she was stunned. Ling Qinglan felt more and more strange. He looked at her carefully and his expression changed slightly. He recognized her. Wasn't she the former top girl of the Hongyan house, Chu Lu? Usually, Chu Lu was seductive with heavy makeup in the brothel. But now she changed her face. He almost didn't recognize her. However, after the auction fair, the woman's identity had been exposed. She was the Xiangzhu of the Hehuan sect. Why did she suddenly appear here tonight? Thinking of this, Ling Qinglan smiled and tentatively said, "Why do you come here so late at night?" Chu Lu was slightly shocked. But when she thought of the warning of the Linli building, her heart sank slightly. She took a deep breath and said nervously, "Emo. You." Ling Qinglan's expression changed dramatically. He knocked Chu Lu out and took her to the east courtyard of the Ling mansion. After a breeze, there were two more people in the east courtyard. Ling Emo saw Ling Qinglan holding a woman. He couldn't help but feel strange. Ling Li also frowned and asked, "Don't get me wrong. This woman actually knows my real identity, so I brought her back." Ling Qinglan explained and put Chu Lu down. There was a trace of doubt in his heart. This woman clearly had the cultivation of the acquired ninth hurdle. If she wanted to escape from him, although it was not troublesome, it would take some effort. But just now, the woman didn't struggle at all, as if she knew that he wouldn't hurt her. Could it be? Is she an old friend? Ling Qinglan's eyes changed. He stared at Chu Lu's face, but he couldn't find any connection between her and him. You can interrogate this person. Since she can recognize you, maybe she knows more detailed information about the destruction of the Yi family. Ling Li said lightly. He stood up and said, I have to prepare the Wudao stone. This study is for you temporarily. Ling Mo, let's go. Ling Li left the study without saying anything. Ling Qinglan was stunned for a moment. He shook his head and laughed. After Su Li's affair, Ling Li was more decisive than before. Cough, cough, Chu Lu, who was lying on the rattan chair, coughed and opened her eyes blankly. She saw that she was in the same room with Ling Qinglan and there was no one else. She was relieved and looked at Ling Qinglan's face with a trace of nostalgia and fascination. Ling Qinglan snorted uncomfortably and said indifferently, Miss, there are only you and me here. You don't have to play dumb. Tell me, who told you my real name? Chu Lu trembled and was surprised. But when she heard Ling Qinglan's question, tears appeared in her eyes. She murmured, Mo, you are really Mo. Do you remember you have an elder sister? Sister. When Ling Qinglan heard this, he was shocked, but he was still unmoved on the surface. He shouted coldly, Nonsense. I'm the only son in the Yi family. How can I have an elder sister? If you still talk nonsense, don't blame me for being merciless and torturing you. Hearing Ling Qinglan's cold words, Chu Lu was completely panicked. Was it because the tragedy of that year had such a great impact on him that he completely forgot her? No, Mo, how could he forget me? I am your sister Xue. Chu Lu couldn't believe it. She couldn't help but step forward and hug Ling Qinglan's back. Her tears were like broken beads. She said, Did you forget the agreement by the lake on that snowy night? As soon as she finished her words, Chu Lu felt that her shoulders were suddenly pinched. She looked up blankly and found that Ling Qinglan had turned around and looked at her with surprise. His cold expression had long melted and was as soft as spring water. Sister Xue, it's really you. Chu Lu stared at Ling Qinglan blankly. After a long time, she finally burst into laughter. She wiped her tears and said with grievance, Little brother, I haven't seen you for so many years. You even want to test your elder sister. Ling Qinglan was ashamed and said, I don't want to. But now the situation in Yunjing City is unclear. I can only do this. Only you and I know the agreement between you and me. Even if you are not Sister Xue, you must be someone very close to her. So, I can feel relieved to recognize you. Chu Lu touched her face and sighed softly, There is a reason why I look like this. No wonder you don't dare to recognize me. Sister Xue, why do you have a relationship with the people of the Hehuan sect? Ling Qinglan frowned and couldn't help but ask. Chu Lu stared at Ling Qinglan, who was already good-looking. She immediately smiled slightly. She told him everything about her experience in the Hehuan sect. As for her encounter with Mr. Li, she didn't mention anything. Damn it. The old witch Yi Tian is so vicious. She learned the secret skill to kill others and treat you like this. I'm going to get even with her. Ling Qinglan's eyes were red and he was furious. He couldn't wait to rush to the nest of the Hehuan sect and kill Yi Tian. Chu Lu quickly held Ling Qinglan and comforted him, Don't. Although the Yinma cult is powerful, the Hehuan sect is also a big sect. If you rashly kill the Hehuan sect, you will expose yourself and give the royal family a chance. Besides, the Hongqian powder in my body has been detoxified. I have escaped from the Hongyan house. In the future, the the people of the Hehuan sect will not find me. The gentle voice of his sister was like the murmur of a brook. It soothed Ling Qinglan's violent mood. He took a deep breath and calmed down. His eyes flashed with wisdom. Sister Shui, it is said that the Hongshan powder is incurable. How did you get rid of the control of the Hehuan sect? Ling Qinglan was puzzled. Although he no longer doubted Chu Lu's identity, how could his sister suddenly escape after being trapped in the Hehuan sect for 9 years with her ability? Hearing that, Chu Lu was slightly shocked. She unconsciously thought of Su Li's order. Although the Linli building cooperates with the Yinma cult, we have some unpleasantness recently. Our relationship is not the same as before. If you dare to reveal any information about the Linli building, don't blame me for being ruthless. Mr. Li had always been mysterious. If he was ruthless, what would he do? Chu Lu thought of the first time she met Su Li. Every time she made a move secretly and every time she probed, she was defeated. She couldn't help but shudder. Such a person was usually kind. But if she violated the agreement, the Mr. Li would be ruthless. The consequences would be unimaginable. Sister Shui, what are you thinking? Why are you sweating? Ling Qinglan took out a handkerchief and wiped the sweat for Chu Lu. Chu Lu came back to herself with fear. She forced a smile and whispered, Xiaomo, although I want to tell you everything, I have an agreement with the person who saved me. I can't reveal any information about him. I can only tell you that I seized the opportunity at the auction at the end of last year and successfully escaped from the sight of the Hehuan sect. Then we can meet. Ling Qinglan frowned. Chu Lu's words were very straightforward. It was not appropriate for him to continue to ask. The mysterious person who helped him secretly could find out his real identity and the identity of the Yinma cult. It was extremely difficult. Sister Shui, you are tired. Let me help you to have a rest. I will arrange your identity well. They left the study and came to the courtyard where Ling Qinglan lived. Chu Lu smiled slightly and reached out to smooth Ling Qinglan's eyebrows. She said softly, you don't have to worry about me. I have endured for 9 years. Now I will be more careful when I meet you. The senior taught me the secret skill of disguise. I will disguise myself and follow you. Then, Chu Lu didn't say anything more. She turned around and walked into the room. Ling Qinglan's heart sank. Who was helping Sister Shui? The person even taught her the secret skill of disguise, which was rare in the martial arts circle. After thinking for a moment, Ling Qinglan subconsciously thought of a person. Could it be him? Ling Qinglan slightly pursed his lips. His life was saved by him. Now, if his sister came back because of him, he really didn't know how to repay such a great kindness. Even if he could detoxify the Hongshan powder, he must pay a big price. After thinking about it, Ling Qinglan shook his head and sighed. Everything was his guess. Since Sister Shui didn't want to say it, he couldn't force her. It was lucky that she came back safely. There was no need to get to the bottom of it. After the disturbance of Chu Lu, a few days later, Su Li received a message from Fang Yuan every day. She was more and more awestruck. She had cooperated with the Yinma cult. The two forces worked together to find the Wanjian sect, but they didn't find any trace. It's impossible. Unless, the Wanjian sect has cooperated with the local forces in Yunjing City and hid in a place that we can't find. Fang Yuan analyzed in a low voice. Obviously, he also noticed the abnormality. If so, don't waste your effort. Su Li's eyes flashed. She thought for a moment and suddenly said, you go to contact someone. What? Fang Yuan was stunned and raised his head in surprise. Did Su Li have a backup plan in the dark? On the second day, Fang Yuan, who disguised himself, sat on the second floor of an unknown tea house. He slowly drank tea and silently counted the time. After a while, a man in bamboo hat suddenly sat down in front of him. Without saying anything, he picked up the wine and drank it. Then he tapped the table with his fingers. "Hearty." Fong Yuan smiled and replied, "It's to drink together." The man in bamboo hat immediately lowered his head and whispered, "Protector Fong, I pay my respects. Is there anything unusual in the royal family?" Fong Yuan came straight to the point. Obviously, he trusted the man in bamboo hat very much. If he lifted the bamboo hat, he would find that the man was Dongfang He, who was captured at the auction that day. Several months later, the effect of the secret skill on Dongfang He didn't weaken, but became more powerful. He was completely loyal to Su Li and even had more members to inquire for information for Su Li. All the shameful information in the Shisan Institute of the Imperial Palace was passed to Su Li through Dongfang He. Hearing Fong Yuan's question, Dongfang He immediately told him in detail what happened recently. Chapter 264. At noon, it was the busiest time in Yunjing City. The Linli building was bustling with customers and the business was much better than before. "Sir, please come in." "Sir, what would you like to order today?" Yin Xuedong and Mei Ruhan were busy collecting money and keeping accounts at the table. Suddenly, the light at the door dimmed. They looked at the door at the same time and were shocked, and they saw the man's dress. Fong Yuan. Fong Yuan didn't disguise himself. How could he come in from the front door? What happened? Yin Xuedong felt something was wrong and immediately called Chu Qingning. "Hey, sir, please come in." Chu Qingning pretended to be enthusiastic and took Fong Yuan, who looked gloomy, directly upstairs. Others didn't find anything strange. In the room, Chu Qingning poured a cup of tea for Fong Yuan and couldn't help asking, "Didn't you go to see the spy of the royal family? Why did you come in from the front door and look so gloomy? Is there any clue about the Wanjian sect?" Fong Yuan took a breath and calmed down for a moment. He said, "There is no news about the Wanjian sect, but Dongfang He sent another important news. Dongfang Shao is going to bestow a marriage." Chu Qingning was confused and repeated subconsciously, "Bestow a marriage? To whom?" He was stunned for a moment and looked at Fong Yuan's gloomy face. Suddenly, his expression changed slightly and he was terrified. "Is it?" Chu Qingning stared at Fong Yuan and found that Fong Yuan tacitly agreed with his guess. He couldn't help but be shocked and paced around hurriedly. How could it be? "I'm going to find Su Li." After a while, Su Li came to the Linli building after receiving the urgent tip-off. After listening to Fong Yuan's low voice, she slightly raised her eyebrows and said calmly, "You mean that Dongfang Shao will bestow a marriage to me?" "Yes." Fong Yuan couldn't hide his anxiety and concern in his eyes. He quickly explained, "According to Dongfang He, Dongfang Shao wants you to marry Ma Jintian for the benefit of the Dongfang family. The imperial edict is being drawn up. I'm afraid that there will be news in a few days. Ma Jintian doesn't deserve you. Dongfang Shao has no right to decide who you will marry." In the end, Fong Yuan was furious, and his cold face was slightly red. Su Li was always as calm as water, and there was no change on her face. Her eyes flickered slightly, and she said lightly, "It's not as simple as you think. Dongfang Shao was scheming. If he suddenly attacked, he must have something to ask for. I need to think about it carefully before making a decision." "Su Li," Fong Yuan still wanted to say something, but Su Li suddenly turned around and said coldly, "Your mind is in a mess. You'd better go to have a rest first." Fong Yuan was slightly shocked, as if he was poured a bucket of cold water on his head. His red eyes became clear, and he immediately looked at Suli with more complicated eyes. Why? It's clearly related to your life's happiness, but you're not anxious at all. Have you never thought about your life from beginning to end? Never considered, me, you, take care to rest. All kinds of thoughts came to his mouth, but became a meaningless concern. Fong Yuan sighed and turned to leave the attic. Suli, who was meditating, didn't look back. Naturally, she did not see how lonely his back was. The room was quiet. Suli touched her wrist, and her expression was slightly cold. At this time, if she was given more time to master enough force, she would not be so passive. Unfortunately, God always seemed to be against her. Dongfang Shao suddenly attacked. There were many coincidences, but there must be inevitability in accidents. The power in my father's hands can actually make that old guy afraid. Suli narrowed her eyes slightly. Although the private troops in Dongfang Rui's hands were excellent, they were not many. They were far inferior to the royal guards. What Dongfang Shao feared was the sudden appearance of the Yunj guards. Was it because he didn't know the layout of the Yunj guards that the old guy feared and then tested? Thinking of this, Suli took a light breath. She could imagine how furious Dongfang Rui would be after the imperial edict was issued. If he was pushed to the extreme, he might only have one way to go, raising troops to rebel. But once it developed into that situation, Dongfang Shao would directly use the imperial power to eradicate Dongfang Rui. She would never allow such an ending to happen. The Ma family has always been the most loyal lackey of the Dongfang family. So, Dongfang Shao chose Ma Jintian. If I marry into the Ma family, my father can only listen to Dongfang Shao for fear of harming the innocent. Dongfang Shao's soldiers can defeat all obstacles for his son without bloodshed. Suli thought quickly. As a person who had lived 2 lives, she knew the situation of Yunjing City better than anyone else. But just because of this, she knew that no matter Lord Rui's mansion, the Linli building or the Yinma cult, she couldn't act rashly. In the previous life, the Yinma cult developed longer and was more powerful. But it was destroyed eventually. If she didn't figure out the reason, she couldn't do anything. So, how can I solve this situation? Suli stood attentively. She began to think about the solution. She couldn't marry into the Ma family and let Dongfang Shao succeed. If Ma Jintian died, this idea just came up, but it was immediately rejected by Suli. It didn't matter if Ma Jintian died. He was not the only choice. There were many young talents in Yunjing City. Dongfang Shao could be replaced by Wu Jin or any other family that was not a threat to Dongfang Shao. She couldn't kill all the young talents in Yunjing City. If I can't kill him, there is only one way. Suli's clear eyes flashed a vague light. No one knew what decision she would make tonight. After a while, Suli left the Linli building alone. When Fong Yuan wanted to follow her, it was too late. He even couldn't see her. It was a quiet night. The next day, it was quite peaceful. There was no news from the imperial palace. Fong Yuan waited anxiously for half a day. Finally, he received Suli's order. He opened the note, and his expression immediately eased. He smiled slightly. Without saying anything, he went out with his servants to do something. In the streets of Yunjing City, a rumor gradually spread. It became more and more fierce under the promotion of some people. It was said like it was true. Have you heard? The child of Prime Minister Ma, that is Master Ma. He is impotent. Ah. Really? Of course. I heard from the girls in the brothel that Master Ma was overindulged in debauchery. His lower body was impotent. Tut tut. These childs really don't know how to control themselves. Ma Jintian is not 18 years old yet, right? Yes. At the beginning, only 1 or 2 people talked about it. Later, it became a secret that everyone in Yunjing City knew. The more it spread, the more unbelievable it became. Some people said that Ma Jintian had sex with more than 10 girls in one night. That was why he got sick. Some people even said that they saw Ma Jintian lose his temper with their own eyes. The rumor was true. In just one day, almost everyone knew that Ma Jintian was impotent. It was a hot topic in Yunjing City. At this moment, Ma Jintian listened to his father's scolding in the Ma mansion. He was confused. Dad, don't you know my temperament? I am not a playboy like Ling Li. How can I go out to fool around? Ma Jintian's face was red. He was so angry that he roared, "It is even more impossible that he is impotent. Which bastard slandered me like this?" In Mada's eyes, Zhang Tai's reaction was a little angry out of humiliation. He stared at his son and asked seriously, "Jintian, is what you said true?" Seeing that his father still doubted him, Ma Jintian was so angry that he was about to die. He nodded helplessly and said, "It's true. Dad, every word I said is true. It is truer than gold. Well, you don't need to say anything. I believe you." Mada waved his hand and said, "You can leave now. I will help you to deal with it." "Yes, Dad." Ma Jintian had no choice but to leave. When he turned around, he looked ferocious. He almost gnashed his teeth. He really wanted to tear the bastard who spread the rumor into pieces. It was a great shame for him to do that. "Bastard, don't let me catch you." Ma Jintian scolded him with hatred. Then he flung his sleeves and left with a long face. Seeing his son leave, Mada's expression instantly turned gloomy, and his heart began to pound. How could it be so coincidental? The imperial palace was about to issue the imperial edict, but Jintian had such a thing. If the emperor misunderstood the loyalty of the Ma family, it would be bad. Mada asked Ma Jintian several times, but he didn't reveal any flaws even though he was furious. Either Ma Jintian didn't know and was set up, or he didn't want to marry Su Li. Thinking of this, Mada sighed deeply and sat down with the help of the table. No matter which possibility it was, the status of the Ma family in Dongfang Zhao's heart would be lowered. "Butler, prepare the sedan chair to go to the imperial palace." Mada put on his official uniform and went out in a hurry. Even if it was not Ma Jintian who bestowed the marriage, he had to be polite. Otherwise, the Ma family would be in danger because of Dongfang Zhao's suspicion. At this moment, in the imperial study in the imperial palace, Dongfang Zhao paced and suddenly smiled. "So, now the whole city is full of the rumor about the boy of the Ma family. The imperial edict that I carefully prepared is useless." Eunuch Feng, who was bowing and standing aside, slightly changed his expression. He immediately knelt down and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, please calm down. It may be a coincidence." "Coincidence?" Dongfang Zhao sneered and said, "I really hope that it is a coincidence, otherwise." Eunuch Feng was slightly shocked. He quickly bowed his head and kowtowed, "Your Majesty, I am loyal and devoted. I didn't tell anyone except Lord Ma, who already knows that you are going to bestow the marriage. If it was you who leaked the secret, do you think you can still talk to me here?" Eunuch Feng trembled slightly and didn't dare to say anything more. "Useless thing." Dongfang Zhao cursed and turned around with a gloomy face. But at this moment, a eunuch passed a message from outside the study, "Your Majesty, Lord Ma asks to see you." Speaking of the devil has arrived. What a coincidence, hee hee. Chapter 265. After a while, Mada, who was outside the imperial study, received the notice. He immediately stepped into the door and hurried in. When he turned around, he saw eunuch Feng kneeling on the ground. He couldn't help but feel shocked. He quickly bowed and knelt beside eunuch Feng. "Your Majesty! Long live your Majesty!" Dongfang Shao slightly opened his eyes and looked at Ma De, who was kneeling on the ground for a moment. He suddenly said softly, "Long live your Majesty. I think you can't wait for me to die of anger now." Hearing this, Ma De was shocked. He raised his head and said excitedly, "Your Majesty, why do you say that? This old official is loyal to your Majesty and the heavens can prove it. I am willing to sacrifice my life for your Majesty and die for you. Your Majesty, if you don't believe me, That's enough." Dongfang Shao waved his hand impatiently to stop Ma De's show. He asked calmly, "Tell me. What's going on with your son?" Ma De wiped his cold sweat and thought that he finally got over the difficulty. He thought of Ma Jintian's reaction and couldn't help but frown. "I can guarantee with my life that only I know that your Majesty wants to grant a marriage. You didn't tell my son. Now Yunjing City is full of gossip because of my son. Someone must be deliberately playing tricks." Deliberately playing tricks. Dongfang Shao thought for a while and then shook his head slightly. No matter how the news is leaked, the person has achieved his goal. Since the boy can't marry my niece, you two tell me which boy is a good match for my niece. This, eunuch Feng was thinking. Although Ma De was disappointed, he didn't dare to show his emotion. He tried his best to solve the problem for Dongfang Shao. After a while, eunuch Feng said first, "Your Majesty, how about the first child of the Minister of the Ministry of Rites? He is handsome." Before eunuch Feng finished his words, he was interrupted by Dongfang Shao impatiently and scolded, "Idiot! The Minister of the Ministry of Rites is 24 years old and has 3 wives. Su Li is my niece and the princess of the Dehan country. Do you want me to be reviled for thousands of years by letting her marry him?" Eunuch Feng trembled and kept kowtowing, "I dare not." "Humph." Dongfang Shao stood up and turned around. He flicked eunuch Feng's face with his sleeves and said, "Listen carefully. I'm choosing a husband for the princess of the Dehan country. How can it be a joke? If he couldn't find a family of equal status, wouldn't he be a joke to others? Our imperial family can't afford to lose this face. If you can't think of anyone, then kneel until you think of someone." Dongfang Shao said and left the imperial study. Hearing the footsteps getting farther and farther, Ma De and eunuch Feng looked at each other and sighed. They both saw the fear and helplessness in each other's eyes. Obviously, Dongfang Shao vented his anger on them because of Ma Jintian. "Eunuch Feng, do you know why His Majesty suddenly decreed a marriage?" Ma De could not help but ask after everyone in the imperial study had left. "There are many young talents in Yunjing City. If your Majesty really wants to grant a marriage to the little princess, there are many people who are well matched." Eunuch Feng reminded Ma De in a low voice. Then he looked around and said in a lower voice, "His Majesty must have a very special purpose. We should figure it out carefully." Ma De's heart trembled slightly. He thought of many things in an instant, but how could he dare to say such a disgraceful thing? If this was just His Majesty's test of him, and he really acted too smart, perhaps His Majesty's next target would be him. Ma De wiped the fine sweat on his forehead and showed a trace of embarrassment in his slightly turbid eyes. Eunuch Feng knelt beside Ma De calmly and didn't continue to remind Ma De. His words were explicit enough. He knew His Majesty's mind very well, but he couldn't live a better life if he didn't know. He deliberately mentioned the son of the Minister of the Ministry of Rites just to protect himself. This time he knelt here because of Ma De. His Majesty really wanted to ask Ma De, not him. If he said a suitable candidate, His Majesty would be more unhappy. In the quiet imperial study, Mada's heavy breathing became more and more harsh. Sweat gathered on the ground under his forehead. It could be seen that his mind was fluctuating violently. Lord Ma. Suddenly, a vague sound came into Ma Jintian's ears. Ma Jintian was slightly shocked. When he was about to speak, the voice came again. Don't make it public. I just can't bear to see His Majesty continue to kneel, so I come to remind him. His Majesty just needs to listen and don't say. Mada was surprised. He didn't expose the voice. Although he suspected that the owner of the voice was the one who leaked the information, he didn't have the confidence to deal with the aftermath well. Besides, he really needed this person's reminder to get through the difficulties. As for whether he was used or not, it had to wait until he successfully got rid of Dongfang Zhao's suspicion. The person His Majesty wants to find must meet 3 requirements. 3 requirements? Mada was shocked. There were actually 3 requirements. First, the person must be well-matched in social status. The person whom His Majesty wants to marry must be someone that all the civil and military officials in the imperial court can't find any flaws. At least, his status is not lower than that of His Majesty. Second, the person's family is either like Lord Ma, who completely works for the Dongfang family. Or, he is just a paper tiger with a status but no real power. It is easier for His Majesty to deal with him. Third, the person must be someone that His Majesty doesn't like. It is better to make His Majesty resist, and then let 8th Lord. In this way, Lord Ma, do you understand? Hearing this, Mada was suddenly enlightened, and then he was shocked. Sure enough. His Majesty couldn't help but fight with 8th Lord. In order to deal with 8th Lord, His Majesty made such a detour. It was really hard to guess the Emperor's heart. However, who was the person who reminded him just now? He could understand His Majesty's thoughts and transmit the sound in the palace. Was it possible that he was not the initiator of the information leak, but a member of the Dongfang family? Did His Majesty send him to remind me? Mada was confused, but he also knew that he could only bury this doubt in his heart, so as not to cause trouble for himself. Anyway, after the mysterious person reminded me, I have a suitable candidate. Mada thought. He didn't need to investigate the news about Su Li. Everything that happened around the first beauty in Yunjing City would be spread by people. For example, the school of the affiliated school that caused a stir a few months ago. Thinking of this, Mada smiled confidently and said to Eunuch Feng, who was kneeling beside him, Eunuch Feng, you are really tired this time. I have already thought of a suitable candidate. Eunuch Feng was a little surprised and amazed. After a short time, Mada thought of a perfect plan. It seemed that Mada's mind was much more powerful than he thought. Soon, Eunuch Feng invited Dongfang Zhao. Eunuch Feng told me that you have already thought of a suitable candidate. Tell me. Dongfang Zhao waved his sleeves and sat down. He looked dignified and looked at Mada, who was humble and respectful. Your Majesty. Mada got up and bowed to salute. I think the 3rd child of the Ling General's mansion is the most suitable candidate. Oh. Dongfang Zhao was surprised and his tone became gentle. Why do you say so? Mada knew that there was a chance and quickly said, in terms of background, the 3rd child of the Ling family, Ling Li's whole family is loyal and brave. Besides, there is a heroine like Mrs. Gu. Ling Li's identity is completely worthy of the princess. Besides, I have heard that the 3rd child of the Ling family is very fond of Su Li. Although he was rejected by the princess in the end, everything depends on human effort. If your Majesty grants the marriage, it may be a blessing and solve the marriage problem of the Ling family. Isn't it killing 2 birds with 1 stone? Dongfang Zhao smiled but pretended to be sad and sighed. indeed, Lingli is ignorant and incompetent. Mrs. Gu has come to me for help more than once. Now the prodigal son has turned over a new leaf. If my niece is willing to marry him, it is not a bad thing. Unfortunately, I don't know if the eighth brother is willing. Ma De was overjoyed and immediately followed Dongfang Zhao's words and said shamelessly, Your Majesty, don't worry. You are the ruler of the country and the elder brother of the eighth lord. The elder brother is the father. It is a great kindness for him to choose a good husband for the princess. How can the eighth lord refuse? Ha 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 ha, Dongfang Zhao heard the words and laughed out loud, You are right. I think too much. Eunuch Feng immediately orders someone to draft the imperial edict. Ma, please go to the Lord Rui's mansion to read the imperial edict later. I hope the eighth brother can understand my painstaking efforts. Your Majesty, is it inappropriate for me to read the imperial edict? It is always. Ma De looked a little embarrassed and looked at Eunuch Feng who stood aside. It was okay that Dongfang Zhao wanted to deal with Lord Rui, but he even wanted him to be a pawn. Why? You don't want to. Dongfang Zhao raised his eyelids and exuded a sense of danger. Ma De was shocked and immediately saluted respectfully, Yes, Your Majesty. At the same time, Ma De smiled bitterly in his heart. He was in a dilemma. If he didn't agree, Dongfang Zhao would punish him. Until he left the imperial study in a daze, he didn't know what he did to make Dongfang Zhao suspect him. I made a wrong choice in the past. In the clear sky outside the imperial study, Ma De exhaled a breath of turbid air. Dongfang Zhao was not a good ruler, but he couldn't hang on to a tree. After Ma De left, Eunuch Feng stood beside Dongfang Zhao with a puzzled face. He really wondered why Ma De was still punished even though he did as Dongfang Zhao said. Dongfang Zhao snorted and woke him up, Send someone to watch Ma De. Don't you think it's too fast to figure out my mind in just 1 hour? Being fast might also be a kind of flaw. Eunuch Feng was shocked and quickly lowered his head, I will arrange it now. The next day. Chapter 266. In the Lord Rui's mansion, Ma De came with the imperial edict. Led by Dongfang Rui, all the people in the Lord Rui's mansion knelt down. Ma De glanced at Dongfang Rui with pity, who had lowered his head. He opened the imperial edict and said loudly, By the will of heaven, the emperor decreed, Su Li, the daughter of Prince Dongfang Rui, is virtuous and beautiful. I am very pleased. Now the third son of the Prince of North is young and suitable for marriage. He should choose a good girl as his wife. Su Li is unmarried and is a perfect match for the third son of the Prince of North. In order to fulfill her wish, I will betroth you to Jun Wang as his wife. The Ministry of Rites will arrange the wedding and choose an auspicious day. That's it. What? My brother betrothed her to Lingli of the Ling family. Dongfang Rui was shocked and stood up from the ground. He couldn't believe it. Li was the most talented girl in the capital. How could my brother betroth her to Lingli, who was ignorant and incompetent? Lord Rui, I know that Princess Li has been living in the affiliated school of the National Academy. You can accept the edict for her. Ma De had a kind smile on his face, but his eyes were very cold. As long as Dongfang Rui dared to refuse, Dongfang Zhao would definitely kill him. His contact with Lord Rui was monitored. He couldn't have anything to do with Dongfang Rui. Dongfang Rui looked pale. He looked at the golden silk paper in Ma De's hand and didn't take it. At this moment, he knew what Su Li meant when she came back to remind him yesterday. No matter what the emperor wants, Dad, just promise him. Don't disobey him. Li could know the action of the emperor brother one step in advance and make countermeasures. How did she do it? Originally, Dongfang Rui thought that even if Su Li hid some secrets, it was just a name to deal with people of the Su family. Until now, he found that he didn't know his daughter at all. Her ability to spy on information was no less than that of some hidden forces in Yunjing City. Lord Rui, Lord Rui. Mada's voice came into Dongfang Rui's ears. Dongfang Rui suddenly came to himself. Mada was not as kind as before, and his words were quite aggressive. He said, Lord Rui, you don't want to accept the imperial edict. Do you want to disobey the imperial edict? Dongfang Rui was shocked and immediately understood Dongfang Zhao's intention. His royal brother actually wanted to lay a hand on him. Why? No wonder Li asked him to accept the request unconditionally. If he refused, it would be the best excuse for Dongfang Zhao to beat him. Unfortunately, Dongfang Rui sneered in his heart. Brother, you would never expect that Li had expected this and arranged everything in advance. If it was before, he would never agree for his daughter, but now, thinking of this, Dongfang Rui took 2 steps forward and gently took the imperial edict in Mada's shocked eyes. He said respectfully, your subject accepts the decree. Dongfang Rui's action was so sudden that Mada and others, who came to read the imperial edict, were all stunned. Even eunuch Feng, who was always expressionless, didn't expect it. He actually accepted the edict. Mada shivered slightly. He pointed at Dongfang Rui, who took the imperial edict, and said in a trembling voice, Lord Rui, you have to think it over. After taking the imperial edict, Princess Li must marry into the Ling family. There is no way out. Are you really willing to do that? Seeing Mada's reaction, Dongfang Rui was a little surprised. He immediately asked with a faint smile, what? Lord Ma seems to be implying something. Mada looked stiff and quickly waved his hand. He said, no, no. I just asked casually. Since Lord Rui accepted the imperial edict, I will go to the Ministry of Rites. This old man will make a trip to the Ministry of Rites. Farewell. Thank you, Lord Ma. Take care. Dongfang Rui shouted. When Mada and others went out of the Lord Rui's mansion, the smile on his face immediately disappeared, and the hidden anxiety emerged. Wu Bin appeared at the right time and looked serious. He said, I'm going to pick up Miss. Hurry up. Dongfang Rui waved his sleeves and said anxiously. Since Li let him agree, there must be a solution. But when Wu Bin asked Su Li, her answer made Dongfang Rui completely dumbfounded. What? Are you really going to marry Ling Li? Dongfang Rui was so shocked that he patted the table. The tea on the table was spilled everywhere. Su Li looked calm and gently nodded. She said in a calm tone, as if what she said had nothing to do with her. She said, the Emperor has issued the imperial edict. Although Ling Li is a playboy, he is not inferior to you in terms of family background. Even if this matter is spread out and causes criticism, it will not cause much trouble. Even if those ministers have objections, Dongfang Zhao is right. The ministers will not embarrass Ms. Gu. Besides, you have just accepted the imperial edict. What can I do to change it? Every word of Su Li hit the nail on the head. Dongfang Rui's heart was cold. It turned out that there were so many twists and turns hidden in it. He didn't think of it before. In this case, why do you want me to accept the imperial edict? Li, this is a lifelong event for you. How can the bastard of the Ling family be worthy of you? How can I explain it to your mother? Dongfang Rui sighed bitterly. Then his eyes suddenly brightened and he said, Li, I can let Wu Bin escort you to leave the Dehan country. As long as you are out of the control of the Dehan country, even Dongfang Zhao can punish you. Wu Bin, it's useless. Before Dongfang Rui finished his words, he was interrupted by Su Li. Father, Dongfang Zhao is so cunning. Since he wants to deal with you, he must be well prepared. If you refuse to accept the imperial edict, the royal guards will destroy the Lord Rui's mansion within half a day. If you accept the imperial edict and let me escape, I will be caught by the royal guards before I see the gate of Yunjing. All the people in the Lord Rui's mansion are like birds in a cage at this moment. They can only act according to the imperial edict. Otherwise, they will die. Father, don't you understand? Every word of Su Li was like a sharp sword stabbing into Dongfang Rui's chest. The latter retreated a few steps with a pale face. He thought that there was still room for turning back. It turned out that Dongfang Shao had come to this step. But I don't want you to be wronged. Dongfang Rui grasped Su Li's hand tightly. His eyes were full of sincerity. Since Su Yu left, there was only Su Li in his life. If his life could help Su Li regain her freedom, he would not hesitate. But now even if he resisted, Su Li's ending would not be better than now. Feeling the warmth from Dongfang Rui's palm, Su Li smiled gently. She stretched out her hand to smooth the wrinkles between Dongfang Rui's eyebrows. Her voice was like a soft spring breeze blowing in Dongfang Rui's ears. Father, it is the greatest luck for me to recognize you in this life. I don't dare to ask for more. Li, Dongfang Rui was moved. Tears flashed in his eyes. But Su Li smiled gently. Fortunately, I didn't kill you in this life. Let me solve all the causes and effects in the remaining time. Father, Ling Li is not as simple as you think. In fact, the first imperial edict that Dongfang Shao made was made by Ma Jintian. Su Li smiled like a flower and gently explained, after I influenced him several times, he became Ling Li. Speaking of it, I chose the third child of the Ling family by myself. I am willing to marry him. Hearing this, Dongfang Rui's sadness on his face turned into astonishment. He was born in the royal family and was used to intrigue. But now in front of his daughter's stratagem, he was a little brainless. Su Li had been living outside the palace all the time. She had never entered the palace. How could she influence the choice of marriage partner? Li, what are you? Before Dongfang Rui finished his words, he was stopped by Su Li's fingertips. Su Li showed a beautiful smile. Her eyes were as bright as the sea. She said, Father, there are some things that I can't say. When the time is right, you will know everything. As for now, please prepare a good dowry for me. Dongfang Rui stared at Su Li in a daze. After a long silence, he finally smiled and said, You are my only daughter. I will prepare a good dowry for you. You will get married in a grand way. You will be as good as the princess. Thank you, Father. Su Li smiled sweetly and stayed in the Lord Rui's mansion for the night. In the next few days, she lived in the Lord Rui's mansion. She was very clear about her situation. If she didn't live in the Lord Rui's mansion now, she would have fewer chances to live in the Lord Rui's mansion in the future. Dongfang Rui was completely busy. He took a lot of gold and silver jewelry for Su Li to choose every day. Although he didn't know what Su Li was planning, he chose to believe his daughter unconditionally. Right now, he could only pray that a Yun spirit in heaven would protect their daughter from suffering and troubles. When the Lord Rui's mansion was busy preparing the dowry, the people of the Ling mansion were stunned by the sudden news. The emperor bestowed a marriage to Su Li. After Mrs. Gu and Chiu Meng received the imperial edict from eunuch Feng, they were stunned for a long time. Then Chiu Meng was ecstatic and immediately came to the east courtyard to tell Ling Li the good news. Li, come out. Don't stay in the room. It's great news. Your grandfather bestowed a marriage to Miss Su Li, whom you like. Ling Li, who was dealing with the information of the Tianya house in the room, heard his mother's voice. He was so scared that he stuffed all the information under the table. When he just finished, he heard Chiu Meng opening the door and coming in. Where did Ling Imo go? Why didn't he stop her for a moment? Ling Li complained for a while. Then his mind returned to what Chiu Meng said. His eyes suddenly became dull because of extreme shock. He trembled and asked, "Mother, what did you say?" Chiu Meng was full of joy. She quickly spread the imperial edict in front of Ling Li. It was written clearly on the yellow silk and black characters. Su Li and I will choose a good day to get married. Ling Li was stunned. At this moment, he seemed to be unable to think. He thought that it was impossible for him to marry Su Li in this life. Unexpectedly, an imperial edict suddenly came from the sky. He never thought that he and Su Li would get married in such a ridiculous way. Master! Ling Imo rushed in with a trace of eccentricity and joy on his face. When he saw Madame was also here, he immediately swallowed his words. It seemed that Master had already known it. Chapter 267. In the imperial palace, Ma De knelt on the ground, and his face almost touched the floor. He even breathed cautiously, for fear of breaking Dongfang Zhao's heart. My eighth brother didn't have any reaction and just agreed. And he even prepared the dowry by himself. You even set the date. 2 days later. There was a faint smile on Dongfang Zhao's face, but the coldness in his words was so cold that Eunuch Feng couldn't help but shiver and bend his back even more. Your Majesty. What I said is true. The Eighth Lord only hesitated for a moment and directly took the imperial edict without any other excessive reaction. Eunuch Feng was also there at that time. If I lied, would be struck by lightning. Enough. Dongfang Zhao impatiently interrupted Ma De's words. He stomped a few steps with a gloomy face. Suddenly, he picked up the memorial on the table and smashed it on Ma De's head. He scolded, "Useless thing, get out of here." Ma De immediately got up from the ground and said while retreating, "Your Majesty, please calm down. I'll get out now, I'll get out now." At this moment, he breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. His Majesty was willing to scold him, which meant that the Ma family could completely withdraw from the whirlpool of the situation and would not be punished again. He had been with Dongfang Zhao for many years. Although he didn't know his temperament completely, he could at least understand 70% of his thoughts. Although Dongfang Zhao was extremely angry at this time, in fact, His Majesty also knew that this time his decision was wrong. Ling Li was just the person he chose according to His Majesty's will. But now when the imperial edict came out, Lord Rui's mansion not only didn't resist, but also happily prepared the dowry. Such a development was almost beyond everyone's expectation. The situation of the royal family is getting more and more complicated. It's not easy to get involved. With this thought in mind, Ma De unconsciously walked to the gate of the palace. He looked back at the majestic and spectacular main gate of the palace. He couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. Then he walked away. At the same time, the imperial study of the palace was still so quiet that even the sound of a needle falling could be heard. Dongfang Zhao turned around and sat in front of the table. He gently picked up a thick roll of files, which were all about the countermeasures after Dongfang Rui raised the army to rebel. He originally thought it was quite brilliant. But now, it was all waste paper. Eighth brother, oh, eighth brother, you really hit it well. Even I, your brother, have underestimated you. Looking at the information of Dongfang Rui, Dongfang Zhao sneered and said, everyone thinks that you love your daughter as much as your life. But at the critical moment, you don't hesitate to sell your daughter. It's really embarrassing for me, Your Majesty. Excessive anger will harm your body. It's more important to take care of your body. Before Eunuch Feng finished his words, Dong Fangshao waved his hand to stop him. Dong Fangshao said calmly, "Don't worry. I'm not that fragile. Since I have missed the opportunity, I will find another one." The marriage between eighth brother and the Ling family meant that the week would still be weak and not worth worrying about. But this wedding banquet. Dong Fangshao narrowed his eyes and said, "If I don't see it with my own eyes, how can I be satisfied?" Feng Xian. Eunuch Feng immediately stepped forward and said, "I'm here." Ling Li made a mistake in the early years. Which girl did he peep at? "Your Majesty, it's General Wu's daughter, Wu Xiuxiu. Summon her into the palace." Yes. The next day, there was only one day left before the wedding. The servants of Lord Roy's mansion and Ling's mansion were so busy. After several days of careful preparation, the Ling's mansion and Lord Roy's mansion were decorated in bright red. It was very festive. The decoration of the east courtyard was more grand. Except for the study, the furniture and decorations in other places were almost replaced with new ones. In the room, Ling Li wore a bright red wedding robe and sat in a wheelchair. He quietly looked at himself in the mirror. Chiu Meng, who personally tied his hair behind him, couldn't help but glance at Ling Li's pale hands. She couldn't help but laugh in her heart. This boy. It was the first time that she saw him so nervous. After so many years, Ling Li indulged in women. She even thought that Ling Li would marry 8 or 10 popular courtesans in the end. Unexpectedly, fate was so magical. This silly boy not only met his sweetheart, but also was lucky to marry her. As his mother, sometimes she couldn't help but wonder whether she was in a dream. Her son was so lucky. Thinking of this, Chiu Meng stroked a strand of Ling Li's black hair with her fingertips. Looking at the cold and serious face in the mirror, she was slightly surprised. She was used to seeing the little bastard with a crooked head. Why didn't she find that Li was so handsome? He was much more handsome than those boys in Yunjing City who claimed to be handsome. In terms of appearance, Su Li is not at a disadvantage. Chiu Meng thought secretly and sighed, "This is the last time for me to tie your hair. In the future, this job will be handed over to Su Li. You should treat her well and never let her down. Do you understand?" "Yes, mother." Ling Li agreed and smiled bitterly in his heart. Although he didn't know what was going on, there must be something fishy in it. In front of Su Yu's grave in the osmanthus forest, she clearly drew a clear line. It was good that she didn't come to seek revenge. How could she agree to marry him? All of this was probably just a play by Su Li. But even if it was just a play, even if it was all an illusion and he was deceiving himself, he was willing to cooperate with Su Li and continue to play. The groom's dress was extremely complicated. Ling Li sat for a long time. In the afternoon, Ling Ping, who was in a military uniform, returned to the Ling mansion. When he saw Ling Li, he couldn't help but tease him, "Brother Li, you look like a talented man in this dress, but your expression is not quite right. Why are you so nervous? Others may think that you are going to the battlefield." Ling Li heard the words and smiled bitterly, "Second brother, don't tease me anymore. I am nervous enough." "Hey! Brother Li, you're wrong." Ling Ping waved his hand and said seriously, "You are the son of the Ling family. You can't show fear at any time, Ping." Before Ling Ping finished his words, Chiu Meng had already walked in. She rolled her eyes at him and said, "Don't make fun of your brother. If you have the ability, find one yourself. I want to see how you can be calm." Since his mother said so, Ling Ping immediately became timid. He shrank his neck and didn't dare to say more. When Ling Li saw this scene, his heavy heart finally relaxed a little. He reluctantly showed a smile, but his expression made Ling Ping frown slightly. When Chiu Meng went out again, there were only Ling Li and Ling Ping in the room. Ling Li glanced at his mother who walked far outside the room. He took off his armor and squatted down to look at Ling Li. He said seriously, "Brother Li, I think you are not right. Tell me the truth. Is there anything you are hiding from me?" Ling Li was stunned. There were too many things he was hiding from his second brother. He didn't know which one Ling Ping was talking about, so he couldn't give a response. Ling Ping thought that Ling Li was self-abased. He couldn't help but sigh secretly. He patted the blanket covering Ling Li's legs and said, "Don't worry. I have seen countless people. Miss Su is really pure. Since she is willing to marry you, she will not dislike you." Ling Li suddenly understood and didn't know what to feel for a while. He had hidden this pair of legs from his family for 10 years. No one knew how many years he would hide it in the future. "Second brother, I understand," Ling Li answered in a low voice. Ling Ping was helpless, but he didn't continue to persuade him. Rome wasn't built in a day. Brother Li's legs had been disabled for so many years. If he could still maintain his confidence, it would be really strange. After seeing his brother, Ling Ping went back to the room and changed into a suit of casual clothes. He immediately came out to help Chiu Meng decorate. He came back for two purposes. One was to act as a facade for his brother, and the other was, the border of Nanjiang country is restless. Maybe I have to go to war immediately after Brother Li gets married. I'd better tell my family after Brother Li gets married. Ling Ping shook his head to dispel distracting thoughts. He had been to the battlefield many times. Now his brother's marriage was the most important thing. Other things were not in his consideration. At night, Ling Li lay on the bed, tossing and turning. He couldn't sleep at all. In the middle of the night, all the people in the Ling mansion fell into a deep sleep. Ling Li got up from the bed and opened the secret compartment under the wardrobe. A set of black clothes came into view. But before he could take off the wedding robe, he was stopped by a pair of hands. "Master, Madam has told me that it's better not to see the bride before getting married. It's inauspicious," Ling Imo said helplessly with dark eyes. "Besides, Madam spent a whole day dressing you up. She even let you sleep with your clothes on tonight. If you take off your clothes like this, you will definitely reveal your flaws tomorrow." Ling Li's eyes darkened. He hesitated for a moment and finally let go of the black clothes. He didn't know whether it was the former sentence or the latter sentence that moved him. Seeing Ling Li give up, Ling Imo couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief and immediately put away the black clothes. "Ling Imo, do you think Su Li really wants to marry me?" "Master, you asked the wrong person. If you want to know, isn't it better to ask Madam in person tomorrow?" "Madam?" Ling Li laughed at himself. He turned around and lay down with his eyes closed. Regardless of whether he slept or not, the night would eventually pass. It was the 5th day of March. It was a good day to get married. The whole Yunjing city was bustling early in the morning. The street in front of the Ling mansion was crowded. If the government didn't maintain the order, even the sedan chair for the bride could not go out. People could hear the discussion everywhere in the street. Everyone knew that the first beauty in Yunjing City was going to marry the first playboy in Yunjing City today. When the imperial edict was just issued, almost all the young talents in Yunjing City beat their chests and stamped their feet. They were so angry that they almost wanted to go to the Ling mansion and kill the good-for-nothing. But the imperial edict issued the marriage. Even if they had 100 guts, they didn't dare to destroy the wedding banquet. After several days of preparation, the marriage between Lord Rui's mansion and the Ling family had become the topic of conversation in the whole Yunjing city. It was not strange that there were so many people on the wedding day. Chapter 268. In front of the gate of Lord Roy's mansion, the wedding procession stopped slowly under the gaze of many people. The maids who were watching at the gate immediately dispersed. "They're here, they're finally here." Mammy Lee was also dressed in red today. She had been with Su Lee all the time. Now that Su Lee was getting married, she would accompany her and take care of Su Lee's daily life. Seeing the handsome young man sitting on the horse, Mammy Lee was overjoyed. She knew some details about Ling Lee. At this moment, she couldn't help but secretly rejoice for Su Lee that she found such a powerful husband. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Ling Lee was carried down from the special seat of the horse by Ling Mo and put on the wheelchair. He was more nervous and excited. He took a deep breath and barely kept calm. He rocked the wheelchair alone and entered Lord Roy's mansion. He came to the door of Su Lee's courtyard unimpeded. Ling Lee was surprised. He had also attended many weddings of big families in Yunjing City. The bridegroom would encounter a lot of difficulties when he came to marry the bride, but he didn't encounter many obstacles. Did Lord Roy treat him differently because of the imperial edict? Or, at this moment, suddenly, a horrible strong wind swept behind him. Ling Lee's pupils shrank and countless thoughts flashed in his mind. Finally, his tense body suddenly relaxed and he didn't intend to resist. Hum. With a cold hum, the strong wind suddenly disappeared when it approached Ling Lee's back. Ling Lee narrowed his eyes slightly. The strength dissipated so easily. This person didn't intend to hurt him at all. Was it a test? Ling Lee pretended to be confused and looked back. But when he saw the face of the person behind him, the confusion on his face instantly turned into astonishment. The person was dressed as a servant. He looked young and didn't seem to be 18 or 19 years old. He looked cold and quite similar to Ling Mo. But compared with Ling Mo, the expression on his face was much more complicated. Are you Fong Yuan? Ling Lee found out the name of this person in his mind. Then he noticed that the latter's pneuma was as obscure as the abyss. He was suddenly shocked. He still remembered that when he met Fong Yuan in the Desu town, he hadn't even broken through the inborn hurdle. Now he had the cultivation above the inborn 6th hurdle. It was just over a year. Such a span was really exaggerated. Thinking of Su Lee's rapid progress in these years, he suddenly realized that Fong Yuan had been with Su Lee all the time. Child Ling, with your intelligence, it is not difficult to guess my purpose today. Fong Yuan's face was cold and his tone was full of killing intent. He said, "You have hurt her once. If you dare to hurt her in the future, I will exhaust all my knowledge and kill you even if I chase you to the ends of the earth." Ling Lee raised his eyebrows slightly. He seemed to be relaxed, but his heart was slightly heavy. He saw from Fong Yuan's eyes. Because he saw the same thing from Fong Yuan's eyes. For Su's heart, of Li, Ling Rui Ling Li, of King of Ling Lee's Fong, he. Thinking of this, Ling Li took a slight breath and exhaled the cold air in his body. It seemed that Ling Li's anxiety and irritation in the past 3 days were gone. In front of Fong Yuan, he finally recovered some calmness as a hierarch of a great sect. I never want to hurt her. If you come here just to warn me, then, you can get out of the way. Fong Yuan frowned, but he was reluctant to get out of the way. His beloved woman was behind the door. She would marry the man in front of him today. If he could, he would rather stand here all his life and never give way. However, everything that was happening right now was her idea. Fong Yuan was a little bitter. After his family was ruined, he wandered from place to place with his sister. He thought that he had suffered all kinds of hardships in the world. But today he knew that there was another kind of bitterness. It was extremely bitter and more unbearable than all the previous ones. Remember what I said. Fong Yuan finally got out of the way. Ling Li took a deep look at Fong Yuan, whose eyes were as sharp as a blade. Then he entered the yard in his wheelchair. In the new yard, Su Li wore a red veil and sat quietly at the stone table. Mammy Li had come to the yard in advance and waited for Su Li. She was very happy. Originally, the bride was supposed to wait in the room, but the miss said that she didn't want to. Finally, she waited in the yard. The emperor's marriage was a symbol of destiny. At the moment, time was tight, so many rules were omitted. So, this rule was not a big deal. After a while, the sound of the wheelchair came into their ears. Mammy Li's face immediately brightened. She came forward and said happily, "Child, you are finally here." Ling Li saw that Su Li was sitting in the yard, and he couldn't help but be astonished. In this way, she probably heard every word of the voice outside the yard. Mammy Li didn't notice Ling Li's reaction. She walked to the back of the wheelchair and pushed Ling Li to Su Li. She said, "Child, don't be in a daze. You should take the miss out. Don't delay the time." Mammy Li took the red ribbon and stuffed one end into Su Li's hands. Then she handed the other end to Ling Li. Ling Li immediately reacted. He clenched the red ribbon that was connected with Su Li and nodded, "Mammy, you are right. Let's go out." "Oh, okay." Mammy Li promised with a smile. She helped Ling Li push the wheelchair to the gate. But she laughed in her heart. Child Ling, who was so high-spirited in the yard in the valley, was so nervous today. He didn't even know how to speak. It was really interesting. When they came out of the yard again, Ling Li didn't see Fong Yuan again. He clenched the red ribbon in his hand and turned his head. His eyes never left Su Li. Although he couldn't see Su Li's face, he knew that it was Su Li just by looking at her figure. Today, Su Li was not as fierce and crazy as she was in the osmanthus forest that day. She walked lightly and followed the wheelchair step by step. She seemed quiet and gentle. In a trance, Ling Li returned to the days when he and Su Li traveled together in Yunjing. They only envied the mandarin ducks but not the immortals. Unfortunately, those days had been fragmented with the disaster. A group of 3 people walked to the gate of Lord Rui's mansion. The people who had been waiting immediately became noisy. The noise was endless. "Come out! Come out! Princess Li is coming. Princess Li must be dressed very beautifully. It's a pity that the playboy of the Ling family got lucky. We have no chance to see her. Hateful! Hateful! How could Ling Li be so lucky? I really envy him." Dongfang Rui saw the 3 people coming out. When he saw Ling Li's appearance, he couldn't help but feel relieved. He could see that Ling Li really liked his daughter. At least, Li would not be wronged if she joined the Ling mansion. After Su Li got into the sedan chair, the MC of the Ministry of Rites shouted, "Start the sedan chair." The wedding procession set off to go back. The people who were watching followed the wedding procession. The whole street was moving with them. Soon, the gate of Lord Rui's mansion became deserted. Dongfang Rui was full of complex feelings. He took a long breath and said, "Let's go." "Yes, master." Wu Bin secretly wiped away his tears and felt sorry for his master. Just because of an imperial edict, Miss had to marry into such a shady marriage. Master must be very sad in his heart. After 2 hours, the wedding procession was like a long dragon. It finally stopped in front of the Ling mansion. When Ling Li turned his wheelchair and stopped in front of the sedan chair, the MC of the Ministry of Rites immediately shouted, "Start the sedan chair." The bride and groom get up. Bow. Ling Li immediately cupped his hands to the sedan chair and looked attentive. Mammy Li looked solemn, but her eyes were sparkling with joy. Mammy Li lifted the curtain of the sedan chair and let Su Li come out. Then she handed the red ribbon to Su Li again. The bride and groom, go straight to the front of the flower hole. Burn incense. Kneel down. Kowtow once, twice, and thrice. The MC's voice continued. After they burned incense, they went through a series of complicated rules. Finally, they came to the main hall of the Ling mansion. At a glance, Ling Li saw his grandma, Miss Gu, sitting on the right side. She smiled so much that the wrinkles on her face gathered together. On the left side, Dongfang Rui looked sad and happy. Chiu Mang and Ling Ping stood beside Miss Gu. There was joy in Ling Ping's eyes, but he was still calm. Chiu Mang had already burst into tears and cried. Bow to heaven and earth, the MC's voice was long. Ling Li turned his wheelchair and turned his back to the hole. He hesitated for a moment and wanted to get down from the wheelchair. People in the Ling mansion saw this scene, and they immediately changed their expressions. Even the whispers among the audience became smaller. In a blink of an eye, the hall was silent. What's wrong with Li? He is ill. He can bow from afar. Why does he get down? Chiu Mang was anxious and wanted to go forward, but she was stopped by Ling Ping. Mother, I think Brother Li just doesn't want to have any regrets. Let him go. Even if he falls, he is willing. If you help him, Brother Li will feel uncomfortable. Chiu Mang's heart was twisted. She said, silly boy, why didn't he tell me anything? Even if I prepared a crutch for him, it would be much better than now. Ling Qinglan, who was also in the audience seat, saw this scene and couldn't help but shake his head slightly. Ling Li clearly knew that the deeper he fell in love, the more painful he would be in the future, but he didn't mean to give up. People who fell in love were difficult to understand, at least he couldn't understand. Thinking of this, Ling Qinglan's lips moved slightly, and a sound was transmitted to Ling Li, to ensure that there is no mistake. You sealed your tendons and meridians yesterday. Now your legs are really useless. If you want to kneel down from the wheelchair without exposing your cultivation, you will be embarrassed a lot. It's better to forget it. Ling Li lowered his head and gritted his teeth. He tried to prop up his upper body without any pause. Ling Qinglan frowned. His voice was clearly transmitted to Ling Li, but Ling Li didn't seem to hear it at all. Ling Li moved too slowly. Gradually, there were whispers among the people who watched the ceremony. What's going on? How can he marry Su Li? What a shame. I can't stand it. Hush, keep your voice down. Ling Li heard every word. His face was slightly gloomy. Every word was like a knife stabbing his heart. He began to speed up. It didn't matter that he lost face, but he didn't want Su Li to be laughed at with him. However, it was difficult for a person whose cultivation and strength were sealed to get down from the wheelchair with only his hands. As expected, Ling Li's hands suddenly lost balance before long. Chapter 269. There was a loud noise. The wheelchair fell to the ground, and Ling Li also fell from it. The maids were so scared that they covered their eyes. Many kind-hearted onlookers also turned their heads and couldn't bear to see it. Just at this moment, a pair of seemingly delicate hands suddenly appeared and held Ling Li's waist tightly, making him kneel on the ground steadily. Maybe because of the big movement, the red veil slipped off. Su Li's beautiful face was immediately seen by everyone, which made them exclaim in amazement. What a beautiful girl! Princess Li is really a beauty. I really envy the third master of the Ling family. There was a lot of discussion in the hall. In the blink of an eye, the scandal of Ling Li was overshadowed. Ling Li stared at Su Li. It seemed that time was stagnant when they looked at each other. Wow! Another burst of exclamation pulled Ling Li back to reality. It turned out that the onlookers looked back and set off a small climax. Chiao Meng saw the scene in the hall and immediately breathed a sigh of relief. She looked at Su Li more kindly than before and even a little more grateful. Su Li's master was the imperial preceptor. Her cultivation was also among the best among many misses in Yunjing City. It was said that she had acquired the 8th hurdle. Although she had never seen Su Li's skills, if she only helped Ling Li to stabilize his body, the red veil on her head would not fall off. This girl did it on purpose to help Ling Li out of trouble. Mrs. Gu looked more sincere with a faint smile on her face. She looked at Su Li very kindly and said, "It's a blessing of our Ling family that you can help my grandson so unobtrusively. You are so considerate." When Mammy Li picked up the red veil and covered Su Li's face again, the 3 bows could finally continue without any hindrance. Second, bow to your parents. Husband and wife bow to each other. The ceremony is finished, send them to the bridal chamber. With the MC's last words, Dongfang Rui and Ms. Gu both breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. The old and the young looked at each other for a moment and smiled. Both of them had unknown meanings. Chiao Meng burst into tears. She leaned against Ling Ping, crying and laughing. She murmured, "Great, great. Li finally has a family. It's great." After Mammy Li led Su Li out of the main hall, the banquet began. The banquet spread from the courtyard of the main hall to both sides of the street outside the Ling mansion, attracting a large number of ordinary people to come to the banquet. It could be said that on this day, because of the marriage between the Ling mansion and the Lord Rui's mansion, almost half of Yunjing City was lively. Ling Li sat back in the wheelchair with the help of Ling Imo. As soon as he came out of the seats in the inner hall, he was surrounded by a group of young talents. "Young royal prince, let me toast you. Congratulations, young royal prince, for winning the beauty. Come, young royal prince, today is your big day, so you can't refuse wine. Ah." Ling Li smiled and drank the wine without saying anything. Others thought he was really happy. Only Ling Mo, who was beside the wheelchair, knew that he was not as happy as he looked at the moment. "All right. The young royal prince is indeed straightforward. Here's another toast to you." Ling Li almost didn't refuse anyone. He sealed his cultivation, and soon he was drunk. His eyes were hazy. Ling Mo looked at him and wanted to help him drink. At this moment, there was a burst of hearty laughter outside the courtyard. "Ha ha ha, it's so lively." Many civil and military officials who were familiar with the voice immediately changed their expressions. They put down the wine and dishes in their hands, came to the gate, and knelt down. "Welcome, Your Majesty. Welcome, Your Majesty. Long live the Emperor." Dongfang Rui and others at the main table in the hall changed their expression slightly. They immediately came out and happened to meet Dongfang Xiao, who just came in from the gate. Mrs. Gu narrowed her eyes slightly and returned to normal in an instant. She walked over with her crutch and was about to salute, saying, "Your Majesty." Dongfang Xiao quickly held Mrs. Gu and smiled hypocritically, "You are so polite. I'm really flattered." Mrs. Gu raised her eyebrows and pretended to sigh. "It's rare that Your Majesty can call me sister-in-law." Dongfang Xiao became serious and said solemnly, "Eldest brother, I will never forget your kindness in those years. Now you and I are old, and many people have passed away. If I don't get close to you, who else can I talk to?" Dongfang Xiao's words seemed to be sincere, which made many guests feel sentimental. It turned out that the emperor had such a relationship with the Ling family. It was not easy for the emperor to keep his original intention after so many years. Mrs. Gu's expression was not very good at the moment. She could only force a smile and said, "Your Majesty, you are busy with state affairs. This time, you not only arrange a marriage for my grandson, but also attend the wedding banquet in person. I'm really honored. Please sit in the inner hall. Dong Fangshao squinted and nodded, okay. Ling Ping followed at the end with a respectful look, but a cold light flashed in his eyes from time to time. Dong Fangshao really deserved to be the emperor for decades. He was eloquent, but he didn't come to pay homage to his grandfather in these years. After a group of people entered the house, the courtyard became boisterous again, and it became more boisterous than before. Many people were talking about various things that the Ling family fought for the Dehan country in those years. Some people even whispered and talked about the secrets of those years. I heard that back then, His Majesty and old General Ling became sworn brothers, and the two brothers worked together to conquer this great land. His Majesty originally had the status of a powerful family, and it was only because old General Ling purposely gave way that the position of emperor fell to His Majesty. Later, old General Ling got married and established a career. Like father, like son. General Ling also made great achievements for the Dehan country. Your Majesty promised the title of Lord of North to General Ling plus the legend of Mrs. Ling. General Ling's mansion was respected, the old people chatted in private, but the young people still surrounded Ling Li to toast. At this moment, Ling Li was extremely drunk. If he didn't sit in a wheelchair and was accompanied by Ling Mo, he would have been lying on the table. Among this group of people, the young man who made the most effort to toast saw this scene. He felt it was enough and made a gesture. Not long after, a young girl with a graceful figure leisurely walked over. Many young geniuses were stunned when they saw her. Wasn't she, the miss of General Wu's mansion, Wu Xiuxiu? She was almost molested by Ling Li in those years. She should avoid the Ling mansion. Why did she appear here? Ling Mo was shocked and felt that something was wrong. But it was too late for him to stop her. Wu Xiuxiu was anxious to obey Dong Fangzhao's order. She showed a hint of bitterness on her face. Her soft words made many child's hearts flutter. Although Wu Xiuxiu's appearance was not as good as that of Su Li, the fairy in the human world, her charm was not possessed by ordinary women. Child Ling, I haven't seen you for a long time. I didn't expect that you were going to get married. Ling Li put down the glass and turned his head. There was a trace of doubt on his flushed face. He stammered, Who are you? As soon as he said this, people around immediately burst into laughter. They thought that Wu Xiuxiu's appearance could make Ling Li, who was lustful, embarrassed. Unexpectedly, it was Wu Xiuxiu who was embarrassed instead of Ling Li. You! Wu Xiuxiu was so angry that she wanted to leave. But when she thought of Dong Fangzhao's order, she had to bear it. She continued to test, Ling Li, don't you even know me? I've seen a lot of men like you, eating from the bowl while looking at the pot. If I'm willing to be your second wife, won't you agree? Even Wu Xiuxiu felt that her face was burning when she said such shameless words. If it weren't for her family, she wouldn't come here to say these disgusting words to this good-for-nothing. Others didn't know what she was thinking. But after her words, more people gathered around to watch. Miss Wu thinks highly of herself. I didn't expect that she could say such words. It's really an eye-opener for me. I think Miss Wu just comes to test Ling Li because of jealousy. She wants to make Princess Li embarrassed. If Ling Li really covets her, then Princess Li. Tut, Ling Li is lustful. I don't think it's possible. Princess Li will be humiliated before they consummate their marriage. Wu Xiuxiu snorted and crossed her arms in front of her chest. She waited for Ling Li to show his embarrassment. She specially dressed up in order to seduce Ling Li. At this moment, Ling Li was drunk. Even if he was sober, he would have an impulse. Ling Mo stood beside the wheelchair and was expressionless like a block of wood. He didn't mean to stop her at all. He had already seen the purpose of Wu Xiuxiu's coming. No matter whether there was someone behind her, what he wanted to know was whether Lingli was sincere in this marriage. If it was sincere, there was no flaw. Even if someone wanted to make a fuss about the marriage, there was no breakthrough. If not, thinking of this, Ling Mo smiled slightly. Crack. Lingli suddenly stared. It seemed that his reverse scale was touched. His red face was full of anger. He directly smashed the wine glass in his hand. He pointed at Wu Xiuxiu's nose and scolded, "Where do you come from? Get out of here." The whole scene suddenly became quiet. No one expected that Lingli would suddenly get angry. Wu Xiuxiu was even more stunned by the sudden scolding. Before she responded, Lingli suddenly retracted his hand and hammered his chest fiercely. He shouted, "I only love Su Li in my life and will only marry her. Since God allows me to marry her, I will never touch any other woman in my life. If I break this oath, I will be struck by lightning. You, who do you think you are? You can't even compare with Su Li. Do you want me to marry you?" Wu Xiuxiu was at a loss for a moment. She didn't expect that Lingli would react like this. Puff! Ha ha ha! After a moment of silence, someone finally couldn't help laughing. Wu Xiuxiu's eyes suddenly turned red. She didn't remember Dongfang Zhao's order in her mind. She cried and ran all the way out of the Ling mansion. There was a smile on Ling Mo's indifferent face. He persuaded helplessly, "Master, you can't drink anymore. It's almost time. You have to consummate your marriage in the evening. Young masters, please excuse me." Chapter 270. After 5 minutes, Ling Mo pushed the wheelchair into the east courtyard. The noise of the main hall courtyard came from far away, which made the east courtyard particularly quiet. Ling Mo looked around and didn't find anyone except the hidden guards of the Yinmo cult. He reached out to draw out the silver needles from Ling Li's waist, but a hand suddenly stopped him at this moment. Ling Mo was stunned. "Master, aren't you drunk?" Ling Li, who was drunk and unconscious, slowly raised his head. Although his face was still red, his eyes were clear. He said slowly, "Dongfang Zhao suddenly arranged a marriage. There are a lot of tricks in it. How can I not prepare a little bit? Even if I seal my cultivation, it is not so easy to get drunk." Then, Ling Li looked at the brightly lit bridal chamber in the courtyard and glanced at Ling Mo, who was still standing aside. Ling Mo immediately understood and left the courtyard. Seeing Ling Li push the door open and turn the wheelchair to go in, Ling Mo sighed in his heart and turned around to disappear into the night. Ling Li gently closed the door and pulled out the silver needles from his waist. The genuine energy in his body ran and he looked up at the room. The red candles were swaying and the light made it a little warm. In the translucent curtain, Su Li with a red veil sat on the edge of the bed with a red wedding quilt. She looked very cute. This was the wedding night of him and Su Li. Ling Li's throat rolled. He pushed the wheelchair and stood up. After hesitating for a moment, he opened the curtain and sat beside Su Li. He picked up the wedding scale on the table and was about to lift the red veil. At the moment when he was about to lift it, the red veil suddenly slipped off and floated to the ground. Ling Li stared at the red silk blankly. When he raised his head, he saw a cold face. The cold eyes almost chilled him to the bone. Even the fiery red lips seemed to be frozen, and he couldn't feel any warmth. Dong! The wedding scale fell to the ground. Ling Li was full of bitterness. Ling Li, pay attention to your address." Su Li's eyes were extremely cold. She interrupted Ling Li's words, "Do you still naively think that I will marry you sincerely? The revenge of my aunt is absolutely irreconcilable. If it is not for the overall situation, do you think I will let you go? Ling Li's heart ached. His face was slightly pale and his eyes were deep. He couldn't say a word for a long time. Su Li forcibly suppressed the discomfort in her heart and then sneered, "Yes, I used you this time to protect Lord Roy's mansion. I will call you husband in front of others in the future." As for others, at this point, Ling Li suddenly caught a glimpse of a shadow outside the door. His eyes immediately changed. He directly held Su Li's waist and lay on the bed. The curtains on both sides fell. At the same time, outside the door, Ling Liuyi and others squatted in the corner, listening attentively. They stared at the room that was still lit, and the sound transmission was extremely complicated. "How? Did you hear anything?" Ling Ling said. "Ling Li, courtyard." Ling, courtyard. Ling Liuyi's face changed slightly, and he immediately took people to slip away. When he was about to climb over the wall, he turned back unconsciously and happened to see Ling Mo among a group of maids and servants. Ling Liuyi was eavesdropping by the window as they did just now. Ling Liuyi held back his laughter and immediately climbed over the wall. He didn't expect that Ling Li, who had always been insensitive, would gossip like them. In the bed covered by the curtain, Ling Li covered Su Li's mouth with one hand. He listened to the movement outside the room quietly, but he didn't find that his whole body was on Su Li's. Su Li's eyes widened slightly. She was ashamed and annoyed. She pushed Ling Li away. Ling Li didn't stop and hit the wall directly, making a clear sound. A group of maids and servants outside immediately became restless. "I heard it. I heard it. What a loud sound." Ling Mo straightened up and looked strange. The sound just now seemed to be that someone hit the wall. Did Su Li fight with the master? Hiss, Ling Li shook his head and sat up from the bed. Su Li felt distressed. She stretched out her hand and woke up in the middle. Then she retracted her hand quickly. Her face was cold again. "You are really cruel." Ling Li smiled bitterly and rubbed his head. He lowered his voice and said, "There are people peeping outside. At least we need to pretend." Su Li snorted and turned her head away. She curled up in the corner of the quilt and lay down. After a long time, she said faintly, "You cannot get out of bed, but, don't touch me." Ling Li was a little relieved. He carefully lifted the other end of the quilt, but found that there were red dates and lotus seeds and other things under the quilt. It was so hard that it bumped against his body. He shook his head helplessly and lay directly on the quilt. The room suddenly became quiet, and only their breathing could be heard. After a long time, Ling Li opened his eyes in the quiet room. He turned his head and saw Su Li's black hair bun. He smelled the delicate fragrance of a virgin. He hesitated for a moment and ran the genuine energy to move his body inch by inch. He didn't stop until he was about to touch Su Li. The fragrance was more intense. Ling Li raised his slender hand and wanted to touch Su Li's hair, which was like a waterfall on the quilt. But he stopped at last, for fear that he would wake her up and she would be angry again. Thinking of this, Ling Li's eyes were gentle. He was ready to watch Su Li and wait for the morning quietly while listening to her regular breath. If he could stay with her like this in this life, even if she was serious to him or even hated him, he would be satisfied. The night was destined to be long. Ling Li suddenly remembered what Su Li said before. She was willing to marry him in order to protect the Lord Rui's mansion. Although Dongfang Xiao was no longer afraid of the Ling family in these years, he was determined not to let the Ling family and the Lord Rui's mansion cooperate and grow. Something must have happened. He quickly thought of the recent rumors about Ma Jintian and realized that Dongfang Xiao's first choice should be Ma Jintian. In this way, Su Li almost gave herself to Ma Jintian. Ling Li's eyes flashed with anger. Just thinking about it made him angry. It took him a long time to calm down. When Ling Li was thinking about it, he didn't find that Su Li suddenly opened her eyes for a moment. She felt his breath rising and falling on her neck. Her eyes flashed, but she did nothing and closed her eyes again. It was a silent night. In the morning of the next day, Su Li opened her eyes and sat up. She was still dressed neatly. She frowned slightly and looked back at Ling Li, who was still sleeping. Her eyes flashed a little. She hesitated for a moment and untied her clothes and threw them on the ground. Then she got out of bed and opened the kitchen door to see what she could wear. Fortunately, the Ling residence was well prepared. Half of the wardrobes in the bridal chamber were filled with women's clothing, all prepared for her. She casually picked a light yellow dress and wore it. Then, she combed her hair into a bun. Only then did a group of maids arrive with the toiletries. The head maid was quite clever. She saw that the curtain had been lifted. She couldn't help but look to the side in confusion. She saw the beautiful woman sitting in the dressing room without any makeup. She opened her lips slightly and hurriedly walked over. She bowed her head and said nervously, "Mistress, you get up so early. I'm here to help you and the master to wash and change clothes." Su Li slightly pursed her red lips and rolled her starry eyes. The little maid's heart was pounding. They all stayed with Madame Chiu Meng before. They were specially selected by Madame to serve the mistress. In the future, the princess in front of them would be their master. How could they not be nervous? Su Li was so clever that she quickly figured out the origin of these maids. She smiled slightly and ordered, "Put them down. I will serve my husband personally. You can leave." Yes. The maids didn't dare to disobey. They quickly put down everything and left the door. It is said that the mistress is gentle and virtuous. I didn't expect that she is so overbearing. However, young master is very fortunate to have young mistress protecting him like this. The maids whispered to each other, but the scene in the room was different. After Su Li washed slowly, Ling Li slowly woke up. He pretended to be confused and sat up. Looking at the messy clothes on the ground, if he hadn't slept at all yesterday, he would have thought that he and Su Li had consummated their marriage. He wore a white shirt and got out of bed. Seeing Su Li in a light yellow dress, his face was slightly hot. He didn't sleep at all in the morning. Naturally, he saw the whole process of Su Li changing clothes. After taking off the red wedding robe and gauze, there was only the belly band left. Hurry up and wash and change clothes. It's time to serve tea. Hearing Su Li's voice, Ling Li immediately woke up. He quickly went to the table to wash and took out a black robe from the wardrobe to put it on. But when it came to tie his hair, he was embarrassed. There were laws in Dahan country. The style of a man's hair was completely different before and after marriage. But he only knew this rule. He didn't know the specific style and how to tie his hair. For a moment, Ling Li sat in front of the bronze mirror and looked at himself with disheveled hair. He sighed and didn't do anything. He never thought that one day he would be puzzled by a simple hairstyle. Su Li sat at the round table and waited. Seeing that there was no movement in the inner room for a long time, she got up and walked a few steps lightly. Then she saw Ling Li with soft black hair. His eyes were melancholy, which made him handsome. A trace of softness flashed in her eyes. She walked over quietly, grabbed the comb in Ling Li's hand with her right hand and combed it gently. Ling Li was stunned immediately. "Li, don't get me wrong." Su Li didn't raise her head and said faintly, "I just do it for myself. At least before the decline of the Dongfang family, you and I can't show any flaws." Ling Li was silent. Although Su Li reminded him of the relationship between them all the time, he couldn't calm down now that Su Li was beside him and helped him tie his hair on the first day of their marriage. Well, let's go out. Su Li adjusted Ling Li's lapel and turned around to push the wheelchair over. When Ling Li saw his appearance in the mirror, he couldn't help but be stunned. It turned out that the ordinary hair could be so beautiful. Su Li's hairstyle seemed to be designed for him. It set off his face perfectly. In addition, there was a wisp of green in the bun. It was really a perfect masterpiece. Li's movements are so skillful. She is faster than me. Chapter 271. Mom, Grandma, have some tea. In the central room, Chiu Meng and Mrs. Gu looked at Su Li, who was kneeling on the ground, and took the tea. Their eyes flashed with love. Especially Chiu Meng, she really liked Su Li from the bottom of her heart. One of you is Ling Li, and the other is Su Li. I don't know how to address you. Su Li, since you are willing to marry my grandson, the Ling family will treat you well. You will also have a share of the property of the Ling family. Mrs. Gu said and took out a stack of shop deeds. It seemed that she was going to completely hand over some of the property of the Ling family to Su Li. Su Li was stunned and quickly waved her hand. Grandma, I just got married. How can I accept the property of the family? I can't accept it. If you really want to give it to me, just give it to my husband. Hearing this, both Mrs. Gu and Chiu Meng were stunned, especially Chiu Meng, who was deeply moved. The value of the shop deeds given by Mrs. Gu was not low. They almost accounted for a quarter of the property of the Ling family. Even if it was presented to Lord Rui, it would be important. But Su Li refused without hesitation. This child really likes San Air. Mrs. Gu was also satisfied. She was determined to give up a quarter of the property to help Ling Li and to show Lord Rui. But it was also a kind of test. If Su Li immediately accepted it happily, she would not like this little girl. But from the moment she refused, she had really regarded Su Li as a member of the Ling family. Okay, don't kneel. Chiu Meng couldn't help helping Su Li up. She pulled Su Li and said, "The breakfast is ready. It is made by your grandma. Your grandma hasn't cooked for many years." Ling Li helplessly watched Su Li being pulled away by his mother. It was just a day after they got married. His status in the family was not much better than that of ordinary servants. If mother knows that it is just a play between Su Li and me, Ling Li sighed and didn't dare to think about it. After Chiu Meng and Su Li left, there were only two people in the room. It was Mrs. Gu Yan. Ling Li turned his head and braced himself to say, "Grandma, what can I do for you?" Gu Yan's expression was serious, and her voice was piercingly cold, with a bit of the murderous spirit of youth. "Su Li is a good daughter, and you can't let her down. In the past, you were young and unmarried, so I couldn't control how you spent your time. But now that you are married and have a family, my Ling family values sincerity. If you dare to go to that kind of place again, I won't recognize you as my grandson." Gu Yan's words were serious, and Ling Li couldn't help but be moved. Although he was a little, he didn't care. Ling Li couldn't help but be angry. He grinned and moved his wheelchair closer to Gu Yan's side. He laughed and said, "Grandson will remember." "Grandma, don't be angry. Mother and the others have gone to eat. Let's go too." Gu Yan saw Ling Li's reaction. It was clear that he didn't take her words seriously. A trace of disappointment flashed in her eyes. She shook her head and got up to walk to the table, but she didn't see Ling Li behind her. He was more than serious. Everything he said was true. The breakfast of the Ling family was extremely rich, and the four people had a good time eating together. Su Li behaved very naturally and didn't let Chiu Meng and Mrs. Gu see any flaws. Ling Li ate quietly, but he felt bitter in his heart. These dishes were picked by Su Li. He knew that Su Li was just acting. As long as they were alone, she would be beaten back to the original state. But he still couldn't help but hope that everything in front of him was true. How good it would be. After dinner, Su Li followed Ling Li back to the east courtyard. Ling Li had been living in seclusion for more than half a year. It was said that he changed his lecherous habits for Su Li, so no one thought it was strange. When they returned to the east courtyard, they happened to meet the maids who were cleaning the room. Ling Li glanced at them and was about to go to the study. He saw a maid open the soft cloth on the bed and took out a piece of white cloth dyed with red. Then she hurried away. What's that? Ling Li was slightly shocked and quickly thought of something. But before he could respond, he found that his right arm was held by someone and dragged to the other side. At the same time, Su Li whispered in his ear, "Honey, aren't you going to show me the collection in the study today? What are you doing?" When his right arm touched the softness, Ling Li was a little confused and was immediately dragged away by Su Li. The maids envied them again. Master and Madam are inseparable. They are really in love. At this time, the two people who were in love came to the study, but they immediately separated. The atmosphere gradually became stagnant. Ling Li frowned and couldn't help but ask, "What's the matter with the red?" Although he had never intercourse with women in his 2 lives, the information on the earth was so advanced in the previous life. Even if he didn't try it himself, he naturally knew the secrets between men and women. Last night, they didn't consummate. How could there be red? Su Li looked indifferent and turned her back as if she was looking at the books in the room. She said, "If we don't do this, how can we confuse the fake with the real one? It's just a little blood. Don't worry about it." Ling Li became more and more annoyed. His eyes darkened and he stood up directly from the wheelchair. He pulled Su Li's right arm and pulled the sleeve. The strength of the inborn warrior was so great that Su Li's right sleeve was completely torn, revealing a fresh wound. "It should be yesterday. Don't you apply medicine to such a deep wound?" Ling Li finally knew where the red came from. He was angry and distressed. When he was about to use genuine energy to treat Su Li, he was pushed away by Su Li. Her cold words pierced his heart like a knife. "You don't need to be hypocritical. I have said that. Except in front of outsiders, we don't interfere with each other. As the hierarch, you are busy. I won't bother you anymore. I will come back in the evening." Then Su Li directly opened the tunnel mechanism in the room, jumped down and disappeared. Ling Li stood alone on the edge of the tunnel. After a long time, he raised his head and looked serious. He said, "Li has reached the inborn 9th hurdle. Why didn't the wound heal itself after one night?" Even though every word of Su Li made his heart bleed since they met, he didn't complain at all. He was still worried about Su Li's safety. Except for Ling Li himself, no one knew what he was thinking about. Linli Building. On the first day of Su Li's wedding, the door of the Linli Building was closed. In the underground adytum, all the leaders of the Linli Building sat in a circle, including Wen Tingshan. Su Li has no choice but to marry into the Ling Mansion. This matter is urgent. No one knows what Su Li thinks. What should we do in the future? Chu Qingning sighed and said the confusion in everyone's heart. Fang Yuan looked up at him. His eyes were dim and he didn't speak. The Yinma cult is the culprit who killed my junior sister apprentice. Su Li can't be willing to marry into the Ling family. Now it's just a temporary measure. What are you worried about? Wen Tingshan snorted. Although he had the shortest contact with Su Li, he was extremely confident in Su Li's temperament. Ling Li is the hierarch of the Yinma cult. Now Su Li is risking her life to marry him. We are also worried. We don't know when we can see her again, Fong Mu said faintly. Yin Xuedong and Mei Ruhan were lost. As women, they could understand Su Li better. At this moment, Su Li must be very uncomfortable. But she couldn't tell Dong Fong Rui all this. She could only bear it by herself. What are you talking about? Why are you so noisy? Suddenly, the door of the adytum was opened. A figure in white appeared in front of everyone without warning. Everyone was stunned. Su Li. Su Li. Fong Yuan trembled slightly and looked back incredulously. It was only the first morning of the wedding. Su Li came to the Linli building openly. Why? You seem to be very surprised. Su Li sat down expressionlessly and poured herself a cup of tea. She said indifferently, it's just a temporary measure to marry into the Ling family. There is no possibility between me and Ling Li. This time, I just used him. That, Yin Xuedong stammered and looked at Su Li's lower body. Her face was red. What she meant couldn't be more obvious. Su Li's reaction was very calm. She just shook her head slightly and said, it's just cooperation. How can I consummate with him? Hearing this, Chu Qingning and others couldn't help but cough. Although Su Li was open-minded and didn't care about it, they couldn't help but feel embarrassed when they heard such explicit words. Fong Yuan secretly breathed a sigh of relief. But then he felt that the situation was more serious. Although Su Li took advantage of Ling Li's love for her to hide in the Ling mansion, if it went on like this, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't. He knew very well that Su Li liked Ling Li very much. If it weren't for that thing, she would have loved Ling Li. Thinking of this, he took a breath and changed the topic. What should we do next? Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows and knocked on the table with her knuckles. She glanced at Wen Tingshan, who was silent, and said, the top priority is to clear up the worries. How is the investigation of the Wanjian sect going? Yin Xuedong shook her head and said disappointedly, we have cooperated with the Yinma cult, but we still can't find any clues of the Wanjian sect. The people of the Wanjian sect probably left. Really? Su Li didn't say yes or no. A glimmer of light flashed in her eyes. They are not under the protection of the royal family and can avoid the investigation of me and the Yinma cult. If they are still in Yunjing City, there is only one place left. Where else can they go? Chu Qingning frowned. He didn't know where the people of the Wanjian sect could hide. But when Tingshan's face suddenly changed at this moment, you mean, Su Li smiled coldly, the spiritual realm. When did the spiritual realm, which has always been indifferent to worldly affairs, intervene in the disputes of the sect? Uncle Shan, it seems that the group of people chasing you is more complicated than I thought. Chapter 272. When Tingshan glanced at the confused people, but he didn't mean to explain immediately. Instead, he thought for a moment and said, Su Li, the situation may not be as serious as you think. The spiritual realm has never cared about the affairs of the world. It doesn't care about the life and death of the forces in the spiritual circle. Wen Tingyi's people probably stayed in the spiritual realm by special means. What do you mean? Su Li had a vague guess in her heart, but she still asked. Wen Tingshan couldn't help standing up and said, let's go there immediately and tell you the details on the way. I'll go too. Fong Yuan stood up and stared at Su Li with a pair of black eyes firmly. Su Li's eyes flashed, and she suddenly had an idea. She immediately swallowed her refusal and nodded, well, let's go now. All three of them were seniors. It was the fastest way to go there, but Su Li needed to save her foundation, so she chose to use a carriage instead of walking. Although Wen Tingshan didn't know Su Li's intention, he agreed and explained the reason on the way. Wen Tingyi is my younger brother. Although we are close relatives, he is indifferent and narrow-minded. His martial arts realm is naturally lower than mine. Not only him, but all the martial artists in the 10,000 Swords Pavilion who are still active should respect me. Feng Yuan was shocked by Wen Tingshan's first sentence. Wen Tingshan was the only senior in the longevity realm in the Linli building. Although he knew he was powerful, he didn't expect that he was the first senior in the Wanjian sect. Su Li nodded expressionlessly and said, "Go on." She was not surprised that Wen Tingshan was the first senior in the spiritual circle in the previous life. Wen Tingshan looked at Su Li with a little surprise. Although he felt strange, it was not the time to care about these details. He recalled what happened in these years and continued to tell with a gloomy expression. Although the token of the head of the Wanjian sect was lost, his strength was there. No one objected to my proposal to be the next head of the Wanjian sect. Perhaps my younger brother noticed that I still had a trace of affection for him in my heart, so he did not hesitate to use it to hurt me. When Tingshan smiled slightly, but his expression was bleak. That night, he colluded with outsiders and gathered more than 40 seniors in the first step of the longevity realm to kill me. If I hadn't broken through from the peak of the first step to the second step of the longevity realm at the critical moment, it would have been impossible for me to escape. Surrounded by 40 immortal levels. What kind of terrifying scene was that? In the entire martial arts circle of the Dehan country, there was no one in the longevity realm. Feng Yuan was shocked. Even Su Li's expression changed subtly. What she had seen and heard in her previous life was too low. She had only come into contact with immortal level when she was following the legendary lady. However, she had no idea about the division of immortal level. It was not a good time to ask about it. That night, I ran for my life in panic, and I ran for several years. My injuries didn't get better, and instead, they were getting worse. Because of this, I couldn't exert 10% of my strength. This situation lasted for a long time until I met you, Su Li. Although the star source of wood you have mastered is very little, it is more than enough to treat the people in the longevity realm. For the past half a year, you've personally treated my injuries. Coupled with the miraculous elixirs, the injuries on my body have long been healed, and my cultivation has also improved slightly. Su Li raised her eyebrows slightly. The star source of wood was the starlight mentioned by Qi Xianqing. It was a power that could only be mastered by the people in the longevity realm. I'm afraid that Wen Tingyi never dreamed that there would be a warrior of the inborn realm who mastered the holy means of healing in the secular world. When Tingshan sneered, "There are only 6 people in the first step of the longevity realm who chased me. With my current strength, it's easy to kill them. You have been staying in the Linli building all the time. Even if you fight, you hide your identity. They shouldn't know it. Why do you hide in the spiritual realm?" Hearing this, Su Li's speculation gradually became clear, and she asked directly. When Tingshan shook his head and smiled bitterly, although our Wanjian sect specializes in swordsmanship, there are also practitioners who practice unorthodox methods. Wen Tingyi has a senior in the longevity realm who specializes in deduction. Relying on this person's deduction skill, they can follow me like maggots in a tarsal bone. I can't get rid of them no matter how hard I try. So, after your injury was healed, that person sensed the danger and hid in the spiritual realm with others. Su Li suddenly realized that everything was caused by the peeping sky skill. The sky-peering technique was a unique technique of the cultivators of the longevity realm who practiced the way of deduction. It could be used to predict good fortune and avoid disasters. It could also be used to track anything with the owner's breath. It had a wider range than the poisonous insect technique. For example, Feng Yuan's vital insect, the poisonous insect 1,000 miles tracking, could only cover a distance of 10,000 miles. But the tracking skill of the practitioners in the longevity realm could reach a distance of 100,000 miles or even 1,000,000 miles. The range would gradually expand with the growth of the practitioner's cultivation. Since you have reached the second step of cultivation and recovered, those people should know that their fate has long been doomed. Escaping into the spiritual realm is just deceiving themselves. Suli curled her lips slightly. She knew very well what the spiritual realm was. Even with the peeping sky skill, she couldn't find any mystery. The practitioner who was proficient in the peeping sky skill must have regarded the spiritual realm as the only way to survive, so he hid in it with others. But he didn't know that the people in the spiritual realm would not care about them at all. After this trip, the matter in the Wanjian sect will be finished. Uncle Sean, I'm afraid you need to go back to the spiritual circle. Suli said calmly. When Ting Shan raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled, after I settle the chaos in the Wanjian sect, I will bring people back to help you. It won't take too long. With his cultivation, as long as he returned to the sect with the token, he could immediately grasp the general trend. At most, he could integrate the Wanjian sect within a month. Then I congratulate you in advance. Ho ho, Fong Yuan sat aside and watched them talking happily. He couldn't help but fall into silence. He found that he couldn't get a word in. He knew nothing about the so-called longevity realm, the peeping sky skill and the spiritual realm. Compared with Suli, his knowledge was too far behind. For a time, a feeling of inferiority suddenly brewed in the bottom of his heart. This inferiority had existed for a long time, but it had been affecting him in a subtle way. At this moment, it was obvious that this inferiority had grown. However, even if he felt inferior, he would never retreat in front of Suli. He would have his own way to make up for all the gaps. After an hour, the carriage finally stopped in front of a dilapidated temple. Fong Yuan got off the carriage and looked around. He couldn't help but feel puzzled. This place was infinitely close to the city wall of Yunjing City. It was a rare desolate place in Yunjing City. This temple. If he was right, it was a temple of the earth where no one worshipped for a long time. Was the spiritual realm here? Suli walked slowly out of the carriage and looked solemn. Although she said it casually on the carriage, she didn't dare to be careless. If Fong Yuan observed more carefully, he would find that every grass, every tree, and even the gravel here contained a unique charm. It was otherworldly and did not belong to the world. It was like a small boat anchored at a dock that only had a tiny connection with the land. If this connection was broken, the existence here would immediately be like a small boat on a turbulent river, drifting away involuntarily. Suli stood silently for a moment and recalled the scene when she met the extraordinary woman here for the first time in the previous life. But just for a moment, she came to her senses. In Fong Yuan's puzzled eyes, she nodded to Wen Tingshan and said, "Let's start." Wen Tingshan's eyes flashed. It seemed that he confirmed something at this moment. Then he did not hesitate to kneel in front of the statue of the Earth God. His height was exactly 99 feet. He patted his chest and forced out a drop of purple-red blood. He shouted, "Blood of the true spirit, open the true spirit." Just at the moment when his voice fell, there was a ripple in the originally calm nothingness like throwing a stone into the lake. The purple-red blood trembled and the ripple became bigger and bigger. Finally, everything in front of him was disturbed. The nothingness was torn apart like a piece of broken paper. Instead, there was another picture. Fong Yuan stared at the surroundings blankly. At this moment, he was not in a dilapidated temple, but a hall with extremely gorgeous and exquisite decoration. At this moment, there were only 3 of them in the hall. Such a magical scene completely subverted his view of the world. Su Li's reaction was average. The spiritual realm needed to be opened with the blood of the people of the spiritual circle. Although she was not a person of the spiritual circle, she had seen this scene countless times. When Ting Shan saw Su Li's reaction and frowned slightly. He could not see whether Su Li was really calm or pretending. At this moment, a graceful voice came. Su Li and the other two looked at the same time. They saw a woman in cyan coming slowly. She gave a salute and said with a warm smile, "It turns out that you are the head of the Wanjian sect. Please forgive me for not going out to meet you." She seemed to be very respectful, but Fong Yuan still felt the indifference and coldness from her. It seemed that everything that happened in the world had nothing to do with them. They were more like bystanders than living in this world. "Fairy Qinghe, nice to meet you." When Ting Shan returned a salute and said in a neither humble nor arrogant manner. He only had two impressions of the spiritual realm, mysterious and powerful. But he didn't dare to speak with contempt like Su Li. "I think we can't hide the purpose of our coming from Fairy Qinghe. Please don't interfere in the affairs of the Wanjian sect." Qinghe nodded with a smile and said, "Head, you must be joking. The spiritual realm never interferes in the affairs of the spiritual circle. It only records the rise and fall of the spiritual circle. The spiritual realm will not interfere in the affairs of the Wanjian sect. Please go ahead, head." Hearing this, Wen Tingshan's face darkened slightly, but he didn't dare to lose his temper. He could only take Su Li and Fong Yuan to look for the people of the Wanjian sect in the huge spiritual realm. But they didn't find anyone except Qinghe, not to mention that they recognized them. Chapter 273. Deacon Qinghe, what do you mean? After the group of people turned around and returned to the original hall, when Tingshan finally asked coldly. He had been to the spiritual realm before. In every country in the secular world and every big sect in the martial arts circle, there would be a spiritual realm stationed. In addition to the head of the realm, there were 6 deacons and many servants with lower status. But now, there was only one deacon in the spiritual realm of Dehan country, Qinghe, and there were no other servants. Was it normal? When Qinghe was questioned, the smile on her face slowly disappeared. Her originally warm tone also quickly became cold. "Pavilion Master Wen, I don't understand what you're saying. If you want to deal with your family's matters, I've already asked you to do as you please. Could it be that you still expect me to provide you with some help?" When Tingshan looked serious and was about to refute, Su Li suddenly stood out and stopped him. "Uncle Shan, it's useless to say more. There is a tactical matrix here, and we haven't really entered the spiritual realm yet." Tactical matrix. Fong Yuan immediately became nervous. He subconsciously put Su Li behind him and looked around vigilantly. A trace of surprise flashed through Qinghe's eyes, but she didn't panic. She slightly raised the corners of her mouth and chuckled. "I didn't expect this little sister to be an expert. This tactical matrix is nothing in our spiritual realm, but not everyone can detect it." Su Li smiled slightly and ignored Qinghe. She turned to Fong Yuan and said, "Do as I say, and I will teach you to break the tactical matrix." Fong Yuan was stunned and nodded with a little strange. If Su Li wanted to command him to break the tactical matrix, she could transmit the sound. Why did she say it clearly? Wasn't it a slap in the face of Deacon Qinghe? Sure enough, Qinghe saw that Su Li not only ignored her but also wanted to break the tactical matrix. Her face immediately became gloomy, and her voice became sharp because of anger. "What a boastful little girl! How dare you break the tactical matrix of the spiritual realm? I'd like to see what you can do." Su Li smiled slightly. "Deacon Qing, you don't need to understand what I can do. But before I break the tactical matrix, please don't act rashly, so as to avoid some unpleasant misunderstandings." Misunderstandings? Qinghe looked angry. "You are just a silly little girl. You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. How dare he threaten the deacon of spiritual realm? I will discipline you for Wen Tingshan." Before Suli finished her words, Qinghe had already attacked angrily. Suli squinted her eyes slightly and didn't dodge. Bang! There was an explosion in the air, and even the surrounding scene rippled. Qinghe widened her almond-shaped eyes and looked at Wen Tingshan in disbelief. She screamed, "Wen Tingshan! You, how dare you attack me?" This was the spiritual realm, the most mysterious and powerful force in this world. Whether it was the inborn realm or the longevity realm, there was no difference in front of this behemoth. The last person who offended the spiritual realm had already died without leaving any bones. Wen Tingshan's face was very ugly. Of course, he knew the result of fighting in the spiritual realm. But Suli didn't dodge just now. It was obvious that she wanted him to fight. Noisy. Suli frowned and looked indifferent. She continued to instruct, "Uncle Shan, restrain her first. Wait until I break the tactical matrix." Wen Tingshan was also forthright. Anyway, he had already started. In for a penny, in for a pound. He directly grabbed Qinghe's nape with one hand, making her unable to move. "Wen Tingshan, you are crazy. Your juniors don't know the rules. Don't you know the rules of the spiritual realm? You're digging your own grave. No one can save you." Slap. A bright red palm print appeared on Qinghe's face. It was burning. Suli slowly withdrew her palm and still looked indifferent. She said, "If you dare to say more, it will not be as simple as a slap." "Shut up." Qinghe's eyes were full of fear. She didn't expect that Wen Tingshan was so bold. With her cultivation of the inborn sixth hurdle, she was no match for Wen Tingshan. She couldn't even react. What's more, she didn't expect that such a 16 or 17-year-old girl could be so decisive and ruthless. She even dared to slap her. She could see that the girl was clearly a hothead. She didn't know why Wen Tingshan obeyed her orders. However, after being slapped, she completely calmed down. The hothead was afraid of the unreasonable, and the unreasonable was afraid of the desperate. In Qinghe's eyes, Suli was desperate. She chose to retreat temporarily. When the tactical matrix was broken, she would return to the spiritual realm and all the crises would be resolved. At that time, she would make Suli beg for death. Qinghe thought bitterly. Suli noticed her gaze but didn't respond at all. She continued to command Fang Yuan to break the tactical matrix. "Suli, are you sure?" Wen Tingshan couldn't help but transmit the sound. Although Suli had always shown extraordinary maturity and wisdom, he couldn't think of a way to break the spiritual realm rashly. "Uncle Shan, don't be impatient. After breaking the tactical matrix, you will know the result." Seeing Suli's confident look, Wen Tingshan was a little relieved. He chose to believe her after getting along with her during this time. However, this sentence was a one-sided statement to cover up panic in Qinghe's ears. A vicious smile flashed across her face. She was already thinking about how to deal with Suli after getting out of trouble. 31 steps to the right, draw your sword. 9 steps forward, shatter the stone pillar. Return to the original position. Suli's voice constantly came to his ears. Fang Yuan's expression remained unchanged and he executed meticulously. In his opinion, the difficulty of breaking this tactical matrix was even less than that of the natural tactical matrix they encountered in the mountains of Dawang village. In less than 10 minutes, the surrounding scene made a sound like porcelain breaking. With the last sword of Fang Yuan, the tactical matrix was broken. After the fluctuation of the tactical matrix passed, the 4 figures appeared in front of an exquisitely decorated hexagonal attic. The plaque, "Spiritual Realm," on the attic was shining. The sudden appearance of the 3 people naturally attracted the attention of people in the attic. When someone saw Qing He being controlled by Wen Tingshan with a pale face, everyone's face suddenly changed. Even the attic itself was faintly shaking. It had not happened for many years that outsiders caught the executive of the spiritual realm. Go and inform the head of the spiritual realm. They have bad intentions. Isn't that the next head of the Wanjian sect? Why does he suddenly attack Lady Qing He? Something big is going to happen today. When Tingshan looked at the chaos of the spiritual realm because of their appearance calmly, but he couldn't help but frown slightly. Qing He saw this scene and finally laughed out loud. Wen Tingshan, if you still have a shred of reason left in you, let go of me now and push all the blame onto this girl. Perhaps if I'm in a good mood, I might even let you live. Otherwise, all of you will die. Wen Tingshan's face was gloomy and his eyes changed. But his hands were always clenched tightly without any relaxation. Qing He didn't understand the relationship between him and Su Li at all. He owed Su Li his life and promised to work for her for 10 years. Even if it was a dangerous situation, he would not choose to give up Su Li and escape alone. Moreover, he was not completely without confidence in Su Li. As for Fang Yuan, who stood beside Su Li, he was always expressionless. No matter what happened, he would completely stand on Su Li's side and would not waver. Not long after, the other 5 executives stationed here all arrived and stood in a line to confront Su Li and the other 3. Soon after, a middle-aged man in a gray robe with a plain face stepped out of the attic. He slightly cupped his hands to Wen Tingshan and said in a neither humble nor arrogant manner, "Head Wen, I've heard a lot about you. You are also a giant in the spiritual circle. How did our deacon Qing offend you? Why did you come to the spiritual realm for confrontation?" Seeing the middle-aged man's gentle attitude, Wen Tingshan frowned a little and hesitated. "Your Excellency, are you?" The middle-aged man seemed to understand and nodded with a smile. "I forgot that I am Chu Xiao, the head of the spiritual realm of Dehan country." Head Chu. Before Wen Tingshan spoke, Su Li stepped out and said with a faint smile. This, Chu Xiao frowned slightly and felt uncomfortable. He saw that Su Li was only about 16 years old. She didn't know the etiquette. The discipline of the Wanjian sect was too loose. Su Li smiled calmly and didn't give the middle-aged man a chance to speak. "It doesn't matter who I am. The important thing is that Head Chu, you are incompetent and let the spiritual realm produce such an unruly executive. What should you do?" "What?" Chu Xiao's expression turned cold. He looked at the pitiful Qing He with a questioning look in his eyes. When Qing He met his gaze, she panicked and immediately cried out, "Building Master, save me. I didn't overstep the rules." This girl didn't know the rules at all. She not only let Wen Tingshan catch me but also slapped me. She didn't take the spiritual realm seriously at all. As soon as the words came out, the other 5 executives were immediately furious and spoke one after another. "Head, you can't be careless. Otherwise, you will lose the face of the spiritual realm. How dare you offend the spiritual realm at such a young age? How did your elders teach you? I think it's better to catch Wen Tingshan and others together and deal with them severely. Even if the Wanjian sect holds us responsible, we have something to say." "Be quiet." Chu Zhao's voice was not loud, but it overshadowed everyone. The scene immediately became silent. As the head of the spiritual realm, his ability naturally surpassed all the executives. In the face of Qing He's cry for help, he thought of another unusual detail at the moment. It seemed that this girl was not Wen Tingshan's elder, but Wen Tingshan followed her orders. "And, little girl, you mentioned the rules of the spiritual realm." With a faint smile on his face, Chu Xiao fixed his eyes on Su Li's beautiful face. "The rules of the spiritual realm are never spread out. Do you really know what rules we follow?" Hearing this, Suli couldn't help but chuckle. Her lips moved slightly, and her voice was transmitted to the latter's ears. Chapter 274. Come on, take Qinghe away. Chu Xiao's expression was no longer gentle, and his decision was even more shocking. The other 5 deacons widened their eyes and felt cold all over. They couldn't help but look at Suli again. What on earth did the woman say to the head? She could make the head punish Qinghe in public regardless of the face of the spiritual realm. Qinghe's face was pale and she was completely panicked. She couldn't stop struggling and screaming, "Lord! What did I do wrong? I have served the spiritual realm for 32 years. Even if I don't have any credit, I have worked hard. Could it be that my years of conscientious service are nothing more than a few words of a silly girl? My lord, you've disappointed this concubine too much." The touching words and Qinghe's innocent and unwilling look made everyone in the spiritual realm feel a little strange. Today's decision of the head was too unfair. Seeing this, Chu Xiao snorted and said clearly, "Bai Ju, find out the relationship between her and Wentingyi of the Wanjian sect. If she really violates the rules of the spiritual realm, she will be expelled from the spiritual realm." What? Qinghe colluded with outsiders. The old man with gray hair turned pale with fright when he heard this. He was Bai Ju who Chu Xiao had mentioned, and he was also the number 1 deacon among the 6 deacons. The doubts in the eyes of the other 4 deacons faded away. They were all surprised and doubtful. Chu Xiao dared to say it clearly, so he must have some confidence. When Qinghe heard this, she knew clearly what would happen to her. She trembled all over and collapsed on the ground like a puddle of mud. She took risks for temporary interests and thought that she would never be discovered. Now Chu Xiao was suspicious, and she couldn't stand the investigation at all. Chu Xiao saw Qinghe's reaction, and the last hesitation in his eyes disappeared. He said with an ugly face, "I wanted to save you some face. Since you don't want it, don't blame me for being ruthless and taking her away." Bai Ju immediately took the order and walked to Wentingxian. Wentingxian glanced at Suli and saw her nod. Then he let go of his hand and let Bai Ju take her into the spiritual realm. A conflict disappeared. After a while, Suli and the other 2 were invited to the room. Wentingxian looked around and knew that the standard of this guest room was not simple. He became more and more curious about what Suli said to Chu Xiao. He didn't think it was only because of Qinghe that Chu Xiao's attitude changed so much. Wentingxian didn't have time to think about it. Chu Xiao came over with a smile. He cupped his hands and said, "Miss, this is indeed the problem of the spiritual realm. As an apology, I will capture the people from the 10,000 Swords Pavilion and hand them over to Pavilion Master Wen. In addition, the spiritual realm will also give you other compensation, which can be regarded as a comfort for you." How long has it been? Master Chu has already found out the truth. Wentingxian was surprised. It was only less than 10 minutes. Even if he wanted to make Qinghe confess, it would not be so easy. Although Wentingxian interrupted, Chu Lu didn't show any anger on her face. She explained with a smile, "Don't be surprised, Pavilion Master Wen. The spiritual realm records the rise and fall of the spiritual circle and even this world. The intelligence system is extremely thorough. Now, except for the mistake of Deacon Qinghe, it is not because of the problem of intelligence, but because no one checked it. Now that Deacon Qinghe is pointed out by this miss, it is easy for the spiritual realm to check it." Wentingxian nodded slightly and understood, but he was shocked in his heart. In this way, nothing in the world could be hidden from the eyes and ears of the spiritual realm. If the spiritual realm had been ambitious and never participated in the disputes of the outside world, the overlord of the spiritual circle would not have been the turn of those forces. It seems that Pavilion Master 1 is satisfied with my handling. In this case. Chu Xiao turned his eyes to Su Li and changed the topic. Miss, can I have a word with you? Su Li's eyes flashed and she nodded. That's what I mean. Uncle Shan, Fong Yuan, I will be back soon. You wait here for a moment. Miss, don't worry. During this time, the spiritual realm will entertain you well. Chu Xiao said considerately, and there seemed to be some eagerness in his words. Although Wen Tingshan and Fong Yuan had a lot of doubts in their hearts, they also knew that it was not the time to ask, so they immediately nodded and agreed. A moment later, on the top floor of the spiritual realm, Su Li calmly followed Chu Xiao in. If Fong Yuan was qualified to come here, he would find that the layout here was similar to that of the attic on the top floor of the Linli building. The only difference was that the cost of the furniture here was more than 10 million times more expensive than that of the attic of the Linli building. When they met alone, Chu Xiao finally showed his true feelings. He didn't look at Su Li as an elder looked at a junior, but as an equal. May I ask which branch of the spiritual realm you are? Why did you leave your post and come to our Dehan country as a guest? After a moment of silence, Chu Xiao probed cautiously. Just now, Su Li didn't say much in sound transmission, just 2 words. Jing Axin. Only people above the level of the head of the spiritual realm were qualified to know this name. Su Li smiled as if she returned to her own home. She walked to the table and sat down calmly. Head Chu, you don't need to test me. I'm not a head of any spiritual realm, let alone a member of the spiritual realm. Chu Xiao's expression changed immediately. How could the name of the great master be leaked? Was there a traitor among the heads of the spiritual realm? But at this moment, Su Li spoke again. Head Chu, you don't need to guess blindly. I'm not an enemy of the spiritual realm. I just had a relationship with that person a long time ago. If it's convenient, please transmit the sound in silence to her and tell her that an old friend invited me. I think she should understand. Chu Xiao was shocked. An old friend? The great master was so ancient and had lived for so many years. But today, a 16-year-old girl said that she was an old friend of the great master. He immediately thought of some legendary existences. It was said that even if those existences died, they could escape the restraint of the natural law and get a glimpse of the mystery of heaven and reincarnate with memory. Was it possible that the person standing in front of him was a reincarnated Supreme Master? Thinking of this, Chu Xiao's heart beat like a drum and his expression became extremely respectful. He bent down and whispered, "What you said, I dare not disobey. But, may I have the honor to know your name, so that I can have proof when I report?" Su Li, Su as in Gusu and Li as in Lin Li. Su Li responded a little weirdly. She just suspected that Jing Axin knew her previous life and present life, but she didn't know how many bizarre things Chu Xiao had imagined. Jing Axin. It was a strange name. It was the name that she told herself when she followed that amazing woman in her previous life. Later, she left Jing Axin and traveled in the martial world. She didn't know how important this name was until she got the chance to do so. The spiritual realm was a terrifying force beyond the mortal world, and Jing Axin was its master. People called Great Lord of True Spirit. In the previous life, she was in a miserable situation. When she met Jing Axin, she had already fallen into the evil circle and was hated by everyone. The so-called righteous people all wanted to kill her. At that time, Jing Axin came forward to protect her and allowed her to practice with her for 3 years. Those 3 years greatly enriched her knowledge. Without those 3 years, she was afraid that she would have died early. However, that encounter also left her with many questions. She couldn't figure out why an ordinary girl like her, who had only stepped onto the path of cultivation by chance, had even gone astray. She didn't have the slightest bit of difference, so why exactly was she able to enter the eyes of the Holy Lord? Moreover, the evaluation of the great Lord of True Spirit in the spiritual circle was positive, while she, an evil witch, was even more unreasonable. After her rebirth, she had always suppressed all kinds of doubts in her heart. Until the so-called broken ring appeared, all kinds of incredible things made her have a moment of enlightenment. Perhaps Jing Axian had already seen her future. Perhaps there were some things she wanted to know from Jing Axian. On the one hand, she came to the spiritual realm to denounce the Wanjian sect, but more for the purpose in her heart. The matter of Wentingyi was just solved by the way. It was one of the iron rules of the spiritual realm not to have cause and effect with the spiritual circle. If Qinghe dared to use her power for personal gain, she would end up worse than she imagined. She vaguely remembered that in the previous life, there was a greedy head of a branch of the spiritual realm and became a local tyrant. Later, he was beheaded by Jing Axian in public. His head was hung in the zone pavilion of the spiritual realm for 7 days and 7 nights, which made people tremble. However, many years after that incident, she changed many futures in this life. After Qinghe was caught, it was still unknown whether there would be such a local tyrant again. After thinking for a moment, the chaotic thoughts faded in her mind. Su Li came back to herself and saw Chu Xiao standing aside and waiting quietly. She couldn't help but feel a little ridiculous, but she didn't explain anything and walked out of the attic. Chu Xiao immediately followed her and whispered in Su Li's ear, "Senior, you have thought for an hour. I have handed the traitor of the Wanjian sect to Wen Tingshan to deal with. If you need." Before Chu Xiao finished his words, Su Li's eyes became cold and she asserted, "The spiritual realm is not contaminated with cause and effect. If you dare to violate it, no one can save you." Chu Xiao suddenly woke up and cold sweat immediately flowed down. "Senior, you are right. I am confused." Su Li shook her head and was about to leave. Before she left, she didn't forget to say, "If you have no other important things, it is better to let your great lord know about my affairs as soon as possible. I will go to the zone pavilion today." Chu Xiao repeatedly promised and sent Su Li to the door. Then he left in a hurry, which made other deacons' eyes wide open. They secretly guessed what noble identity Su Li had and even wanted to explore it. However, this idea was interrupted by Chu Xiao's warning before it was implemented. No one dared to think about it anymore. When the three returned to the Linli building, it had been half a day. Wen Tingshan was full of bloody smell. Obviously, he had just killed someone. He didn't talk too much with Su Li and left directly. He needed to go back to the Wanjian sect to deal with the funeral affairs. With the deterrence of the spiritual realm and the token of the head, it was easy for him to succeed as the head. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.